Part 22. The Rebirth of Space, the Lucky Girl from a Farm Family. Author, He Would Fire Every. Chapter 211. Chapter 211 Adding Obstacles. Ensu bowed in response, took 2 steps back, turned around and left quickly. Huaruiming and Lu returned to the dining room together. Lu frowned and asked, "Why does the Emperor want that land deed? Did you hear some rumors?" Huaruiming shook his head, "I don't know." Mrs. Lu looked at her son and asked, "Did your father tell you anything before he was alive?" Huaruiming shook his head, "My father only discussed it with Chen Song when he was alive. How could I know anything? I also learned many things about Long Yingwei from Chen Liang and the others." Lu Shi sighed, "Your father didn't expect that he would leave so early, so he didn't make preparations early." Huaruiming asked, "Anayang, do you know anything?" Lu shook her head and said, "I don't know much, and you also know that your father doesn't let women get involved in Long Shadow Guard's affairs. Once, your father and Chen Song were discussing something in the study. I went to deliver sweet soup to your father, and I heard a few words at the door." Huaruiming straightened his back, looked at Mrs. Lu and asked, "What did Anayang hear?" Lu Shi thought for a while and said, "They spoke in a low voice in the house, so I couldn't really hear them outside. It seems to be saying that no matter what, you have to find the Dragon Mark Order or something. Only by finding the Dragon Mark Order can you get the key and map from Lao Zonfang." I wanted to listen again, but Chen Liang came over and called me. Your father heard the sound outside the door and stopped. Just these few words, I don't know what map or key it is." Huaruiming nodded and said, "I know that my father has been looking for the Dragon Pattern Order. My father asked people to turn over the old house several times to find the Dragon Pattern Order. The Emperor asked for the land deed, but it was also because of the Dragon Mark Order?" Huaruiming thought for a while and shook his head, "Probably not. The Emperor has known about the Dragon Mark Order for a long time and has never interfered before. He will not interfere now." Ms. Lu felt uneasy and said, "It's so good, why does the Emperor want the land deed?" Huaruiming raised his hand and rubbed his temples, and said, "Don't think about it, I've already asked someone to inquire, and there will be news back soon. I didn't rest well last night. I'm going to be very sleepy now. I'm going to take a nap." Mrs. Lu muttered, Go. From now on, you should go to less flower houses. If you like something, raise it. Do you understand?" Huaruiming responded as he walked out, "I know." Not long after Huaruiming took a rest, Ensu came in and said, "Master." Huaruiming was woken up by someone just as he fell asleep. He glared at Ensu angrily and said, "What's the matter? Didn't I see you just fell asleep?" Ensu slumped his shoulders and stood by the side with his hands down, not daring to speak. Huaruiming sat up angrily and shouted, "I woke up the general, and you are mute again? Say, what's the matter?" Ensu glanced at Huaruiming and whispered, "I have a letter handed back." Huaruiming then remembered the business. He raised his hand and patted his head and said, "I forgot about this. What letter did you send back?" Seeing that his master had regained consciousness, Ensu took a step forward and said, "Eunuch Gao from the palace has left the palace." Before Ensu could finish speaking, Huaruiming interrupted, "Eunuch Gao has left the palace. Which Eunuch Gao is the one next to the Emperor?" Ensu nodded repeatedly, "Yes, Eunuch Gao, who is beside the Emperor." "Where did Eunuch Gao go out of the palace? The British Duke's mansion? Did the Emperor know about Mr. Louis R? Did he let the British eunuch enter the palace to question him?" Huaruiming asked with interest. Ensu shook his head, "No, Eunuch Gao went to Wuotong Lane." Huaruiming frowned and asked, "Wuotong Alley? Is there any restaurant in Wuotong Alley worth a visit to Eunuch Gao?" Ensu looked at Huaruiming gossiping and said, "Master, you must not have thought of where Eunuch Gao went to? In fact, I have seen this man before. Huaruiming was even more confused. Have you seen him before? Who is it? There are no people with high official positions in Wutong Lane. Huaruiming was thinking about someone who lived in Wutong Lane while talking. And Su reminded, I forgot, Miss Gu lives in Wutong Lane. Huaruiming turned to look at Ansu. Of course he knew that Gu Huayu lived in Wutong Lane. He sent people to keep an eye on Gu Huayu until the British Duke's people spotted Gu Huayu. He was afraid that the British Duke's people would recognize his people, so he withdrew them. Eunuch Gao went to see Miss Gu. Ansu nodded. Eunuch Gao went to Wutong Lane to announce the decree, and the emperor issued a decree to make Miss Gu the princess of Yanran. The inquirer was far away, so he only heard a rough idea, not a very real one. I only know that Eunuch Gao went to Wutong Lane to announce the decree, and Gu Huayu accepted the decree. The emperor made Gu Huayu the princess. Huaruiming frowned and asked, why did the emperor make Miss Gu the princess? Ansu shook his head, I don't know. The inquirer came back without reporting. Previously, his mother had discussed with him about having a foreign wife. Huaruiming was still thinking about taking Gu Huayu in and waiting for Gu Huayu to give birth to a son and a half-daughter before taking her back to his house. Why did the emperor suddenly make her the princess? She has become the princess, how can he let her be the concubine? Huaruiming was depressed. Ansu saw his master frowning and thought Huaruiming was wondering why the emperor made Gu Huayu the princess. Then he said, don't worry, I will ask someone to find out why the emperor made Miss Gu the princess. Although Huaruiming was not worried about this, he also wanted to know why the emperor made Gu Huayu the princess. Huaruiming waved his hand and said, go quickly. Ansu turned around and retreated. Thinking that Gu Huayu had become the princess and that he could no longer reach her, Huaruiming couldn't sleep anymore and fidgeted in circles in the room. He said in annoyance, if I had known that this would happen, I should have taken action earlier and caught it in my mouth. Just when Huaruiming was feeling upset, Ansu left and returned. Huaruiming asked anxiously, did you get the letter? Ansu shook his head and said, no, it was someone from Mr. Jiang's side who came over to hand over a message asking him to go to Fanlu to get together. Huaruiming waved his hands impatiently, I won't go, I won't go. I'm very upset today. How can I be in the mood for a party? I went to call him back and said he was busy and couldn't leave. Ansu bowed down and stepped back out. As soon as Ansu retreated to the door, Huaruiming raised his hand and said, wait, there's no need to go back, I'm going. Have someone prepare the car and help me change my clothes. Ansu agreed and turned around to give instructions. On this day, the capital was too lively. In the morning, the news that the father and son of the British government shared a woman spread throughout the capital. In the afternoon, 2 imperial edicts and an oral edict came from the palace and spread among the major families. After hearing Du Bin's report, Britain was so shocked that he couldn't recover for a long time. Du Bin stood on the side with his hands hanging down, holding his breath to reduce his sense of presence. With his many years of experience in serving the British Duke, the Duke was very angry at this time. After a long time, the Duke asked, where is Zikin? Let him come to see me. Du Bin bowed down and went out to tell people to look for Lu Zikin. Lu Zikin and Eunuch Gao left the palace together. Eunuch Gao went to Wutong Lane, and Lu Zikin returned to Chengqiu Duke's mansion. At Chengqiuagong's mansion, Ye Minghao invited Mr. Shi to the mansion for tea at the request of Lu Zikin. Second Master Shi thought that Ye Minghao had something to say to him, so he drank 3 pots of tea with him, but did not see Ye Minghao say anything serious, so he said, Sci-fi, we have been friends for many years, so if you have anything to say, just say it. Ye Minghao smiled bitterly and said, I want to say it too, but I don't know where to start. Shi Hekang thought that Ye Minghao was going to ask about his sister, so he asked with concern, have you encountered something unspeakable? There is nothing hard to say between us brothers. Just tell me, and I will analyze it for you. Maybe you can. I found a solution. Yeminghao spread his hands and said, it's not that I have anything to say, it's Zikin who asked me to date you, and he has something to say to you. Unexpectedly, I invited you here, and he came to the palace in an emergency. I can only leave you to drink tea and wait for him to come back. Are you okay today? I won't delay you, right? Shi Hekang was stunned. Many years ago, he and Lu Zikin could play together. Later, the third sister chased Lu Zikin. In order to avoid embarrassment, he tried to avoid situations where Lu Zikin was involved. Later, Lu Zikin was traveling abroad and was not in the capital. Counting it all together, they hadn't gotten together for 5 or 6 years. Why did Lu Zikin suddenly ask him out? Do you know why Zikin wants to see me? Shi Hekang asked. Yeminghao shook his head, I don't know either. He came over this morning and asked me to date you, but... Uncle, Master 6 is back. Ming Xian entered the room and reported. As soon as Ming Xin finished speaking, Yeminghao stood up and asked, have you told him we are waiting for him here? I'm sorry to keep you waiting for so long. Lu Zikin stepped into Tingzhou Island and cupped his hands towards the 2 people in the pavilion. You are finally back. I even asked He Chang to drink 3 pots of tea, Yeminghao said. Lu Zikin did not go down the long corridor, but crossed the courtyard and walked up the stairs quickly. As he walked, he said, I encountered something urgent and had to go to the palace. I'm sorry. While talking, Lu Zikin came to the pavilion and bowed towards Shi Hekang. Shi Hekang stood up, returned the gift with his hands, and said politely, it's okay, I have nothing to do today anyway. Come on, sit down. Shi Hekang went to greet Lu Zikin. Yeminghao poured tea for Lu Zikin and asked, what's the emergency? I want you to go to the palace in a hurry. Lv Zikin took the tea from Yeminghao's hand, lowered his head and took 2 sips, and said, Mrs. Ping and Miss Shi San went to Huayu Pavilion on Daowen Street this morning. Yeminghao and Shi Hekang looked at Lu Zikin. Yeminghao asked, Huayu Pavilion? Which rouge shop does Miss Gu open? Lu Zikin nodded, well, it's Xiao who opens that shop. Shi Hekang heard San Mi and Yang Jing talking about Gu Huayu and asked, is there anything wrong with my mother and Yamei going to Miss Gu's shop? Lu Zikin shook his head and said, there is nothing wrong. Mrs. Ping recognized Xiao as a child of the Hua family 15 years ago. What? A child from the Hua family? Shi Hekang stood up and looked at Lu Zikin in shock. Yeminghao looked at Lu Zikin, then at Shi Hekang, and asked, which flower house? The flower house on Yongchun Road. Shi Hekang stared at Lu Zikin, waiting for his answer to confirm the questions in his heart. Lu Zikin nodded, yes, my mother went with Mrs. Ping. My mother said that Xiao looked very much like Uncle Hua. The mole on Xiao's right earlobe confirmed that she was the child of the Hua family, and she also brought Xiao with her. I want to go to Wanfu to visit Mrs. Ping. Yeminghao refilled Yeminghao's tea and said, Hekang, sit down and talk. That day, when I met Miss Gu in the south of the city, I felt that Miss Gu was extraordinary. I didn't expect that she was Uncle Hua's daughter. Qinjian, Gu, did the lady already know her life experience? Lv Zikin said speciously, you have to ask Xiao Yu to find out. Yeminghao asked, what are you going to do in the palace? Tell the emperor about this. Lu Zikin nodded, well, Uncle Hua died in mysterious circumstances. The emperor asked the Ministry of Punishment to accept the case. 15 years later, there has been no result. Who knows what is going on behind the scenes? I was worried that the people behind the scenes would be disadvantageous to Xiao if they found out, so I went to the palace and informed the emperor, who would reveal Xiao's identity. Seeing Lu Zikin's small words on the left and another on the right, Shi Hekang asked curiously, Qing Yan and Yan Ran are familiar with each other? Yeminghao coaxed, yes, Qinjian, Are you familiar with Misku? Are you worried that it's not just a business partnership? Yeminghao asked and raised his eyebrows at Lu Zikin. Lu Zikin glanced at Yeminghao, then turned around and replied to Shi Hekang's words, Xiao is my savior. If she hadn't saved me back then, I might have died long ago. Yeminghao took the words and said half-jokingly, because of this kindness, Qinjian planned to marry him with his life, but unexpectedly, the British prince ignored Qinjian's wishes and forcibly arranged a marriage for him in the Prime Minister's palace. Shi Hekang couldn't comment on Lu Zikin's marriage. At this moment, he wanted to return to Shi's house as soon as possible. So he said bluntly, what is Qinjian's appointment with me today? Lu Zikin originally wanted to use Yang Yushi's hand to impeach Lu Dingning, but he changed his mind after returning from the palace. So he said, it's nothing serious. We haven't sat together for many years. I wanted to see if you have some free time today and have a cup of tea together. Yeminghao looked at Lu Zikin doubtfully, since when did this kid start telling lies? Did he look okay when he ordered him? He clearly had a solemn look on his face. Shi Hekang stood up and cupped his hands and said, then let's meet up another day. I want to go back home early to have a look. Lu Zikin stood up, cupped his hands and said, I came out of the palace with Eunuch Gao. Eunuch Gao went to Wuotong Lane to announce the decree. The emperor named Xiao Princess Yan Ran. At this moment, Xiao may have gone to Wanfu to pick up Mrs. Ping. Shi Hekang asked in surprise, the emperor made Yan Ran the princess. Lu Zikin nodded, yes, Princess Yan Ran has also decreed that Mr. Wan and Mrs. Ping will reconcile. This is Xiao's request. Shi Hekang said hello happily twice, turned around and walked out hurriedly, Sci-fi, Qinjian, I'm going back home first, let's meet up another day. Lu Zikin and Yeminghao sent Shi Hekang to the door of the house. They watched Shi Hekang walk away before they turned around and walked back. Yeminghao asked, you came here today to find Hekang. Is it really okay? Lu Zikin turned his head to look at Yeminghao and said, it's really okay. You still don't believe me? Sir, someone from 4th Master Jiang's side came over and handed over a message saying that he had booked a table at Fanlu and asked me to come over and get together. Our Yuan came over and reported. Yeminghao smiled and said, I see that you are very busy every day. LV Zikin looked at Yeminghao and said, together. Yeminghao shook his head, a gathering of you and me is indispensable without the playboy. Mr. Ye can't stand the playboy's behavior, so don't go and cause trouble for yourself. You can go alone. Thank you for your votes, thank you all. I wish everyone a happy May Day and everything goes well. End of this chapter. The Rebirth of Space, the lucky girl from a farm family. Author, he would fire every. Chapter 212. Chapter 212 Strange Yang and Yang Qi. LV Zikin knew that Yeminghao and Huaruiming would not deal with each other, so he did not force him. Said, thank you very much for today. Yeminghao smiled and said, brother, please say thank you and go out. Go quickly to save others from waiting. Lu Zikin walked in with Yeminghao and said as he walked, don't worry, it's too hot and I'm sweating all over. I'll go change my clothes first. Grandma knows that I've entered the palace, so I'm afraid she'll be worried, so I have to go and give it to her first. Grandma, please say hello before going out. Yeminghao said, just in time, I also want to go to my grandmother's place, and I'll wait for you. Lu Zikin nodded, okay. The two brothers walked in side by side. Lu Zikin turned his head to look at Yeminghao and asked, how are you and Miss Shi-san? Is there any progress? In the days since Lu Zikin came back, the Ye family, from Madame Qin to Yemingjin, have talked to him about Yeminghao's marriage many times. Speaking of this, Yeminghao shook his head in frustration, no, Yamei hides when he sees me now and doesn't give me a chance to speak at all. LV Zikin asked, have you met? After I told her about the blind date according to your method, I met her once on Ma Sing Street and once near the Liuguang Tower. Both times, as soon as she saw me, she hurriedly left in the car. Ye Minghao let out a long sigh, opened and closed the folding fan in his hand, closed and opened again, extremely troubled. Ye Minghao's sigh touched Lu Zikin's heart, making him feel a little heartbroken and couldn't help but come up with an idea. He asked, "Do you know where she likes to go? Try to find a way to meet her by chance." Ye Minghao shook his head, "It's useless. These days, as long as I have free time, I will go to the places she usually likes to hang out." But she seemed to have changed her gender. She never went to the places she usually loved to go. I have been around Shi Mansion several times, but I have never seen her. These days, Ye Minghao took his leave from the yamen and walked around the streets with Ming Xin, just to meet Shi Yame by chance. MRSGN could not see him all day long, thinking that he was hiding from his family. Lu Zikin thought for a while and said, "Then write a letter and ask someone to transfer it to her so that she can understand your thoughts." Ye Minghao's eyes lit up. "Yes, you can still write a letter, but who should you entrust to forward it? This is related to the reputation of the girl's family. You can't just trust anyone, you have to find someone you can trust." Lu Zikin said, "Xiao's life experience has been made public. She and Miss Shi-san are cousins. They can play together, and there will be opportunities to meet in the future. You go and write the letter, and I will ask Xiao to forward it to Shi Miss 3. Ye Minghao nodded repeatedly, "That's a good idea, Qinjian. I'm going to write a letter to my grandmother. I'll go there later." Lu Zikin smiled and said, "Go ahead." Lu Zikin returned to Zizuyuan, changed his clothes, and went to Qingfang Hall to pay his respects to MRS Jean. MRS Jean was still taking a nap. Lu Zikin asked Nanny Feng to tell her, then turned and walked towards the door of the house, telling Yuan, "Get the car ready and go to Fanlu." LV Zikin took the car out of Qingqiu Duke's mansion and went straight to Fanlu. When Lu Zikin arrived, Xian Wang, Zhang Si, Huaru Iming, Lu Zixun, and Lu Zijian had already arrived first. Lu Zixun saw Lu Zikin first and raised his voice and said, "My son is the last one today, and I will be punished with 3 drinks in one meeting." Everyone looked at the door. Lu Zikin entered the room and bowed his hands to the wise king first. The Xian Wang pointed to the seat next to him and motioned for Lu Zikin to sit there. After Lu Zikin thanked him, he bowed his hands to the rest of the people, and then sat down next to the wise king. Lu Zixun looked at Lu Zikin and said, "Zikin, your marriage has been decided. It's such a happy event. You should do something to entertain everyone." Lu Zixun didn't look at Lu Zikin's gloomy face. After speaking, he turned to look at everyone, "Do you think so?" Huaru Iming immediately agreed, "That's right. The third wife of the Prime Minister's palace is famous in the capital for her talent and beauty. This is a good match that is hard to find under a lantern. Zikin deserves to treat her." Lu Zixun took over the word sourly, "That is, Wang Sunyang must be talented, good-looking, and have a good family background. It is indeed a good match that is difficult to find even with a lantern at the door. For this reason, my mother-in-law said that my grandfather was partial." Having said this, Lu Zixun looked at the wise king and said, "My grandfather is really partial. My grandfather never asks about my eldest brother's marriage or the marriage of my subordinates. He put a lot of thought into Zikin's marriage." Zhang Si looked at Lu Zikin and saw that he was drinking tea with his head down, showing no signs of happiness or anger. He took the words and said, "Zixun, you are going too far. You are all the grandsons of the British Duke, and your palms and backs are full of flesh. How could the British father ignore you? The British Duke is worried about Qinjian's affairs because General Luda is not in the capital and cannot make plans for Zixun, so the British Duke is more worried about him." Lu Zixun waved his hand, "Huanzi, you don't know the situation of our family. My grandfather is really partial." Sigh. Lu Zixun wanted to continue talking, but Xian coughed. Lu Zixun swallowed the rest of his words, looked at the Xianwang guiltily, and lowered his head to drink tea. Zhang Si looked at Lu Zixun and shook his head secretly. This guy has been going on for 10 years without making any progress. The Xianwang turned his head to look at Lu Zixun and asked, "Have you been writing books recently?" Lu Zixun nodded, "Back to your lord, yes." The Xianwang frowned slightly. He didn't like Lu Zixun's polite look. "It's quiet in the palace, do you want to come over and read a book? When you moved into the palace, I left a small courtyard for you in the palace," the wise king said. Without waiting for Lu Zixun to answer, Lu Zixun took over. "I just said that her grandfather was eccentric. In fact, Wang Ye was also eccentric, and he considered Ziqin everywhere. When the prince moved from the palace to the palace, Ziqin was not in the capital, so the prince left a courtyard for him. I and my eldest brother are in the capital, but we have nothing." Lu Zixun has always been worried about the fact that the wise king left a small courtyard for Lu Zixun. He didn't mention it before, but now he has become biased and poured it out all at once. The King Xian glanced over with a cold look. Lu Zixun finished what he wanted to say and was playing with the cup in his hand aggrievedly, without looking at the King Xian. The wise king's cold eyes swept away the loneliness. Lu Zixun smiled lightly and said, "Thank you, Your Majesty. I am doing well in Qingqiu Palace. Mingqin will be dismissed next year. I will review with him and discuss with each other. The review effect will be better." Seeing Lu Zixun's polite rejection of the wise king, Zhang Si smiled and smoothed things over. "If we have someone to discuss it with us, we will get twice the result with half the effort by reviewing it. It's really good." The wise king wanted to continue his persuasion, so Chen Jiayun came in and whispered in the wise king's ear. After hearing this, King Xian turned his attention to Lu Zixun and said, "Zixian, my grandfather's people are looking for you, saying that my grandfather is looking for you for something." Lu Zixun expected that the British Association was looking for him, so he was not surprised. He bowed his hands and said, "Then I'll go back first. Let's meet up another day." Zhang Si got up and saw each other off. Lu Zixun curled his lips in dissatisfaction and said to Huaruiming next to him, "You see, Grandpa will always only have him in his heart. When have we, Grandpa, ever looked at us?" Huaruiming noticed that the wise king was dissatisfied with Lu Zixun, so he did not dare to continue to agree. He sipped his tea and said lightly, "That's because Ziqin is excellent and can solve problems for my grandfather, so my grandfather likes him. If you can be like Ziqin, if you are so good, your grandfather will also like you." The wise king nodded with satisfaction and said, "What Wenda said makes sense. You only see others favoring Ziqin. Why don't you think others favor him? If Ziqin was a troublemaker who was good for nothing and caused trouble everywhere, look at it, who would be partial to him? Evaluate yourself by others. People in their 20s should not just complain all day long." Although King Xian has a noble status, his age is such that Lu Zixun is 4 or 5 years older than King Xian. Being lectured by someone younger than him, Lu Zixun felt a little embarrassed. His face turned blue and white, and he lowered his head without saying a word. Seeing the awkward atmosphere, Zhang Che looked at Huaruiming and changed the subject. "Wenda, I just heard that Miss Gu who had dinner with us last time is your sister, and the emperor named her Princess Yan Ran. Did you know?" Huaruiming stood up in shock and looked at Zhang Che with wide eyes. "Are you telling the truth?" Zhang Che saw his shocked expression and thought he didn't know anything about it, so he nodded and said, "Of course it's true." The wise king looked at Zhang Che with a confused face and asked, "What are you talking about, princess? Why can't I understand this?" Not only the wise king could not understand, but also Lu Zixun and Lu Zijian. Lv Zijian and Lu Zixun stayed at Prince Xian's mansion last night, and they played wildly until late at night. The wise king took leave this morning and did not go to the morning court. He slept until the end of the month and did not get up. After getting up and receiving Zhang Che's message, a few people washed up and went to Fanlu, so they didn't know anything about the news that had spread throughout the capital. Zhang Che told the story about Gu Huayu's ennoblement, and also talked about the British government affairs. After hearing what happened to Lu Dingning and Lu Xiran, the wise king stood up and said, "I have something to do, so I'll stay here today. Let's meet again another day." Lu Zijian stood up after him. Now he had received an errand at Prince Yen's mansion. Wherever Prince Yen went, he had to follow him. After seeing off the wise king, Lu Zixun sat blankly in his seat and murmured, "How could this happen?" Huaruiming patted Lu Zixun on the shoulder and said, "I told Xiran about this before, and told him to cut off the green light, otherwise something will happen sooner or later. He said that his heart was filled with green light and could not be pulled out." "Well, everything." Lu Zixun leaned back in his chair. He knew in his heart that this was his father's fault. Fathers shouldn't rob their sons' women, but there are parents in the world. Even if the father is wrong, he can't say it. Huaruiming looked at Lu Zixun and asked, "What are your plans? Should you sit here for a while or go back?" Lu Zixun shook his head, "I'll be more upset when I go back and listen to my mother cry. I'll just sit here for a while." Huaruiming said, "You stay here. Huanzi still has to stay here with me. Forget it, you and I can go to Giun Pavilion." Zhang Che said with a smile, "Just stay here. I have nothing to do today. Let's have a couple of drinks." Huaruiming asked Lu Zixun, "How are you doing? Have something to drink?" LV Zixun nodded and said, "Okay, one drink will solve 1,000 worries." "Drink." Zhang Che greeted the waiter to serve wine and food. LV Zixun returned to the British government and went directly to Wen Yuan Pavilion. When the British Duke saw Lu Zixun coming in, he pointed to the chair beside the table and said, "Zixun is here, sit down." Lu Zixun bowed to the British Duke and sat down. He asked straight to the point, "Grandpa, is there anything wrong with looking for Zixun?" The British Duke nodded and asked directly without mincing words, "Have you known Miss Gu's identity for a long time?" Lu Zixun shook his head and denied, "I don't know. I only found out today that she is Uncle Hua's daughter." The British Duke stared at Lu Zixun closely, wanting to see how true or false his words were. "Tell me, how did you get to know her?" Lu Zixun said calmly after thinking about it, 5 years ago, when I was traveling and went to Xishan to investigate the route leading to Xinhan between County Magistrate Chen and the prefecture of Song Dynasty, I was chased by people sent by the old lady. That day, I happened to meet Miss Gu going to the county town for business, and she saved me." The British Duke frowned and asked in surprise, "The Yang family sent people to hunt you down? Why didn't you tell them when you came back?" Lu Zixun sneered, "What's the use of saying it? Will you believe it? Will you punish her? Has she done few things under your eyes in these years? How did you do it? Do you need me to list them one by one?" The British Duke was speechless when asked by Lu Zixun. After a while, the British Duke said, "I will investigate this matter." Lu Zixun sneered indifferently and said lightly, "What does it matter whether we check or not? She is the mother of the Empress. Even if you find out, what can you do? I didn't say anything when I came back, so I didn't expect you to give any explanation." Lu Zixun's words touched the sore spot of the British Duke. The British Duke looked at Lu Zixun with some annoyance. "Because of this, you don't believe me or the prince? Why don't you want to be the consul in the prince's palace?" Lu Zixun faced the British Duke's angry eyes without any fear or concession, and replied, "Should I believe it? Do I dare to believe it? In the words that the old lady often talks about, Zixun, Xiran and the prince are blood relatives with the same blood. In the eyes of the old lady, I am nothing but an obstacle. Some words, if you hear them, it will hurt. If you hear them too much, you will believe them." Lu Zixun pointed to his chest and head as he spoke. The British Duke looked at Luzikin, not knowing how to answer. After a long while, he sighed and said, "But, you are a descendant of the Lu family. The prince is in power and is very important to the Lu family." Luzikin nodded and said, "I know, and I also hope that the prince can ascend to the throne." "Then why didn't you go to the palace to help the prince? You know in your heart that the prince trusts you and needs your help," the British Duke asked gently. Luzikin shook his head, "I know how much I am worth. Your Majesty is planning a big deal. My ability is limited. I dare not go to your side to make blind ideas and miss your big deal. Grandfather is resourceful and knowledgeable. He is the king's talisman." The British Duke sighed, "I understand what you mean. Are you going to help the prince no matter what?" Luzikin replied, "Grandpa, what you said is wrong. It's not that I don't help, it's that I don't have the ability to help. At the moment, the most important thing for me is to review my studies and prepare for the scientific examination next year. As a person like me who doesn't have a grandmother, I have to plan my own future." The British Duke was angry at Luzikin's words and said, "Do you have to speak in a weird way?" Luzikin smiled and said, "Of course, I don't have to say anything. Like that day, you threatened me with her safety." The British man was very angry. "Luzikin, don't think that she is the princess, there is nothing I can do about her. I tell you, even if she is the princess, if I want her to die, she will still not be able to see the sun tomorrow." End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Rebirth of Space, the lucky girl from a farm family. Author, he would fire every. Chapter 213. Chapter 213, Force him. Luzikin smiled and said, "I believe this, but I will also say the same thing to you. If she makes any mistake, the British government will not be able to get out of the quagmire. Let's see who can have the last laugh. You treacherous son, for the sake of an outsider, you actually went against me," the British Duke scolded. Luzikin sneered and said, "In the British government, my father has been an outsider for a long time, so my mother has been living in the Duke's residence these years. I have understood this for a long time." After finishing speaking, Luzikin stood up, bowed to the British Duke and said, "Zikin still has many books to read, so I have to leave. Grandpa, take care. Zikin will come to visit your grandfather another day." The British Duke's face was extremely difficult to see. Luzikin ignored it, turned around and left the study, walked along the corridor, looked up at the sun that had turned westward, and was still dazzling. Luzikin withdrew his gaze and looked at the pomegranate tree not far away. The fiery red pomegranate flowers were in full bloom on the branches, making them even more beautiful under the sunlight. Luzikin stopped and stared at the pomegranate tree. He vaguely remembered that this pomegranate tree was planted by Dubin when he was 5 or 6 years old. That spring day was bright, and he fell into a deep sleep for most of the day. When he woke up, he drank the medicine. Looking at the beautiful spring scenery outside the window, he didn't want to continue sleeping, so he sneaked out when no one was paying attention, and unknowingly went to Wenyuan Pavilion, where he happened to see Dubin planting trees. He leaned against the pillar in the corridor and watched Dubin dig a hole, put the saplings into the hole, fill in the soil, and water the saplings. Dubin did everything well, looked up at him, and greeted him with a smile. He asked Dubin, "Can a dead branch survive if planted in the ground?" Dubin was stunned for a moment, then nodded and told him that he could survive as long as he watered the dead branch at the right time and took good care of it. Next year, this small dead branch would come back to life, bloom, and bear fruit. His belief in living seems to have come from that time. In the blink of an eye, more than 10 years have passed. The small withered branch of the year has grown up a lot like him. He has the confidence to live and survive those vicious and sad days. Until God sent Xiao to him, Xiao pulled him back from the hands of the king of hell and allowed him to be reborn. Today, he and his grandfather broke up, and this day finally came. Before Lu Zikin walked away, he looked back at the study and saw Chen Jiayun and Du Ben standing at the door. Lu Zikin smiled in relief and walked towards the entrance of the courtyard. After Lu Zikin left, Du Ben reported to the British Duke, "My lord, the sixth master has left." The English Duke looked at the hourglass and said, "He has been standing in the courtyard for a quarter of an hour." Du Ben leaned forward and said, "Yes, Mr. Lu has been standing by the pomegranate tree." The wise king took a sip of tea and said, "Zikin values love, and my grandfather should not force him like this." The British Duke sighed and said, "I don't want to force him. I just want to use my status to suppress him. I think I'm relying on my old age to show off. I thought this would make him more afraid." Alas, Yang was too stupid and short-sighted, and what he did hurt Zikin's heart. As the old saying goes, trees are afraid of being peeled off and people are afraid of being sad. When people's hearts are broken, it's hard to have trust. If it weren't for Ziqin's suggestion, how would I know that the Yang family sent someone to assassinate him? The wise king sighed and said, "Ziqin is also forbearing enough. What happened 5 years ago is only revealed today. Ziqin, let's do this for now, don't push him anymore, he is stubborn, and the more you push him, the more disgusted he will be." How to deal with the matter between Xiren and his second uncle. Speaking of Lu Dingning and Lu Xiren, the British Duke felt blood rushing to his head, so he leaned back, took a deep breath, and exhaled heavily to calm down. This matter is not simple at first glance. There is a hand behind the scenes. These two unsatisfactory things have been tricked by others without even knowing it. "I am still investigating the person behind the scenes," the British father said. The Xian king frowned and asked, "Is someone controlling it?" "Who?" "Prince Qi's mansion." The British Duke shook his head. "I don't know yet," he said. The British Duke asked Du Ben to tell the wise king the news he had found. After hearing this, the Xian king pondered for a moment and said, "So, the other party has been eyeing Xiren and the second uncle a few years ago. The position of the second uncle as a minister may not be preserved." The British Duke nodded and said in an undisputed manner, "First try your best to protect it. If you can't protect it, you can only accept it calmly. This unsatisfactory thing, I have put a lot of effort into finding this position for him." He was easily defeated. The King Xian didn't want to mention Lu Dingning, who had too few achievements but more than enough failures, so he changed the subject and said, "The position of Minister of War is extremely important. Now that my second uncle is here, let's see who will take over. Does my grandfather have anyone to recommend? There is also the post of Minister of Rights, which has been vacant for several years. My father may arrange it this time, so we have to recommend a few people." The British Duke nodded, "I understand. For the position of Minister of War, I would like to recommend Lu Guangliang from the Jiangyi camp. Lu Guangliang was once your uncle's favorite, and he has a high prestige in the army. As for the post of Minister of Rights, Fang Ziwen from Hanlin Academy was recommended. Fang Ziwen is a poor scholar who was supported by me in the early days and is from Taiyuan Prefecture." The wise king nodded and said, "Let me give you a copy of their resumes. The matter between my second uncle and Xiren must be handled smoothly, so as not to leave any traces behind, which will become a handle in other people's hands another day." The British Duke nodded, "I understand." The wise king stood up and said goodbye. "Okay, I will go see my grandmother and then return to the palace. Zikin is stubborn, so don't push too hard. That girl is the one he cares about. Even if he wants to move her, we can't do it ourselves. Hasn't Zikin's marriage been settled? As long as we reveal this information, someone will naturally come to trouble the princess." The British Duke finally smiled after being sullen all day. "Your Majesty is right. The wise king bowed his hands and said goodbye, "Grandpa, take care of yourself." The British Duke sent King Xian to the gate of Wenyuan Pavilion, watched King Xian go to Rongan Hall, and then turned around and walked back. "The woman hasn't been found yet." Du Ben shook his head and said, "The master who has returned to China has not been found yet." The British Duke said, "Increase manpower, make sure to find the woman, and check her carefully. Also, all the people around Dingning and Ziran will be killed with sticks." Du Ben leaned forward and said, "I understand, little one." The British Duke said, "Go and do your work, while I go and take a rest." The British Duke took 2 steps, turned around and continued to give instructions, "As the prince has ordered, the matter about Zikan and the princess should be reported to the public." Du Ben lowered his hands and said, "Yes, I understand." As Luzikan's car came out of the British government house, Ruan asked, "Master, where are we going?" After thinking for a while, Luzikan said, "Take a spin on the street, shake off your tail, and then go to Chang'an restaurant." Luzikan knew in his heart that what the British Duke said today was not an outrageous statement. If he wants to deal with Xiao, Luzikan doesn't dare to think about it carefully, he has to be prepared. Luzikan went to Chang'an restaurant and told shopkeeper Miao, "Let people keep an eye on the British Duke's mansion and the Xian Prince's mansion. From today on, everyone entering and leaving the British Duke's mansion and the Xian Prince's mansion must be investigated." Shopkeeper Miao looked at Ryuan blankly, wanting to ask Ryuan what happened. Ryuan shook his head slightly at Shopkeeper Miao and told him not to ask any more questions. Shopkeeper Miao lowered his hands and turned around to make arrangements. Luzikan came out of Chang'an restaurant, changed into a very ordinary carriage, and asked Qingshan from the restaurant to drive back to the Duke Qingqiu's mansion. As the car left the backyard of Chang'an restaurant, Luzikan ordered, "Qingshan, remember to enter through the back door of Duke Qingqiu's mansion." Qingshan bowed and said, "Don't worry, I understand." Ryuan asked, "You are so cautious, what happened?" Luzikan briefly explained the matter, and finally confessed, "Be more careful in your actions in the future." Ryuan nodded in agreement, "Young understand, do you need to inform Drgu?" Luzikan said, "I will look for opportunities to tell Xiao and let her take some precautions." Luzikan returned to Qingqiu Palace and saw Yeminghao sitting on the corridor at the entrance of Zizuyuan. He joked, "Cousin, are you waiting for me?" Yeminghao smiled and replied, "Qingyan didn't ask knowingly." After saying that, Yeminghao moved closer to Luzikan and whispered, "I have written the letter. When will Qingjian hand it to the princess?" Luzikan raised his eyebrows and said with a smile, "Didn't I come back specially to get the letter?" Yeminghao put his hand on Luzikan's shoulder and said, "Thank you, good brother." Luzikan turned his head and looked at Yeminghao and said, "Just talk." Yeminghao immediately said, "Isn't talk enough? Well, if you like Tingzuzhu, you can take it as you please. How about this? Are you sincere enough?" Luzikan looked at Yeminghao and smiled, "Okay, how many of your things in Zuzhu were not moved from Zizuyuan?" Yeminghao smiled sheepishly, "That's right." Seeing that Yeminghao was a little embarrassed, Luzikan stretched out his hand and said, "Give it to me." Yeminghao didn't come back to his senses for a moment and asked, "What can I give you?" Luzikan smiled and said, "I believe it." Oh, Yeminghao hurriedly took out the letter from his sleeve pocket and handed it to Luzikan. He then bowed and said, "Brother, thank you." Luzikan took the letter and entered Zizuyuan. Yeminghao followed behind and asked, "Qingjian, when will you give it to the princess?" Luzikan said, "Why don't you go out after having dinner with your grandmother? Are you so impatient? Let me tell you, there is no point in being anxious. This letter will not be delivered to Miss Shi-san until tomorrow at the earliest." Yeminghao smiled and said, no hurry, you change clothes, I will wait for you, and we will go to have dinner with grandma." Lu Zikin changed his clothes and came out, and went to Qingfang Hall with Ye Minghao. When Mrs. Jean saw Lu Zikin, she hurriedly asked, "Zikin, how do you feel about entering the palace today? Is everything going well? I heard that Miss Gu has been made a princess." Lu Zikin nodded and told everyone what happened in the palace. Mrs. Jean nodded and said, "That's good. With the status of princess, ordinary people can't bully her." Lu Zikin nodded, then looked up at Mrs. "Yeah, Mom, the Duke asked me to go back to the Duke's mansion." Mrs. "Yeah" straightened up and asked nervously, "What did he want from you? What did he threaten you with?" Lu Zikin shook his head, "No, he didn't threaten me this time, but I contradicted him." Mrs. Jean put down the teacup in her hand and asked, "You contradicted him? What's going on?" Zikin gave a general summary of what happened in the afternoon. After hearing this, Ye Mingkin said, "My aunt and Zikin should have been so tough." Mrs. Jean nodded and said, "If we have different ambitions and don't agree with each other, sooner or later there will be a fight. It's okay, we just tear each other apart, each has his own life, and each has nothing to do with it." Mrs. Ye shook her head, "You think of that family too simply. Do you think you can get along with each other after just saying a few words to the British father? Brother Zikin has said this, why do they have the nerve to come looking for Brother Zikin, are they shameless?" Ye Mingjin asked. Mrs. Ye sneered, "What they want is not face, but profit. As long as it is beneficial to them, why do they care about face? Have they done enough to go back on their word? Just watch, in less than 3 days, they will go back to find Zikin and tell him that as a son of the Lu family, he shoulders the mission of honoring the family. Forget it, let's not mention them. Let's eat. I'm starving." Mrs. Jean took over the words and said, "I don't want to think about it anymore. Zikin just knows it well. There will be a way for the car to reach the mountain. Eat." After dinner, Ye Minghao looked at Lu Zikin frequently. After seeing her, Mrs. Jean asked, "Minghao, do you still have something to do with Zikin?" Ye Minghao nodded and said, "Yes, we have some things to discuss." Ye Mingkin asked hurriedly, "What's the matter? Can I come with you?" Ye Minghao asked, "Together? Have you finished the book Zikin asked you to read?" When it came to reading, Ye Mingkin's enthusiasm instantly dropped. "You guys can discuss it, I'm going back to read." Ye Mingjin looked at his second brother sympathetically and said, "My second brother is so pitiful." Ye Minghao glanced at Ye Mingjin and took over the words, "Poor, who hasn't come here like this? Thinking about it back then, I was much worse off than Mingkin. I had to do everything by myself. Who sympathized with me? People, either have extraordinary talents like Zikin and have a photographic memory. Either you are like me, God rewards hard work, and you have to work hard to get on the list. Mingkin you." Ye Mingkin didn't want to listen to Ye Minghao's lecture and walked out of the room quickly. "God rewards hard work, I can do it too, I'm going to read a book." Ye Minghao shouted towards Ye Mingkin's back, "Hey, Mingkin, don't listen, what I say is experience. Experience is the best teacher, you know." Ye Mingkin said without looking back, "I know, next you will say that experience is the best master. My brother, you are the only one who tells me this. If it were others, you would rarely say it. Right? Look, they will all memorize it." People in the room burst into laughter. Mrs. Ye looked at Ye Minghao and said, "Mingkin is even afraid of you." Mrs. Jian smiled and said, "If Minghao and Zikin have something to do, just go and do it." Ye Minghao got his mother's permission, bowed to everyone, and pulled Lu Zikin out. After leaving Qingfang Hall, Ye Minghao cupped his hands and said, "Zikin, please. Please help the princess." Lu Zikin looked at Ye Minghao who was a little anxious and said, "I know, I promise to deliver it to Miss Shi-san." Lu Zikin took Ruhi out of the back door of Qingqiu Duke's mansion, walked around outside to make sure no one was following him, and then went to Minjiao Pavilion. Lu Guang received the letter and greeted him in the backyard. He held his hands in greeting and said, "Hello, Master 6. Zikan asked, "Is Xiao here or in Wuitong Lane?" End of this chapter. The Rebirth of Space, the Lucky Girl from a Farm Family. Author, he would fire every. Chapter 214. Chapter 214 Protect her. Lu Guang leaned back and said, "Go back to Mr. Lu, the princess is in Wuitong Lane." Lu Guang straightened up, glanced at Lu Zikan secretly, and thought to himself, didn't they just separate in the morning? Why are you here again? Does Master Lu not know that he is engaged? Are you not afraid of ruining the reputation of his princess when you come frequently to look for her? Since Lu Guang learned about Lu Zikan's marriage proposal, his favorable impression of him fell to the bottom. Lu Zikan's mind was all on Gu Huayu, and he didn't notice Lu Guang's eyes. When he learned that Gu Huayu was not here, he asked a little disappointedly, "Will Xiao come over today?" Lu Guang shook his head and replied dully, "I don't know, the princess hasn't said whether she will come." Lu Zikan was thinking about whether to go to Wuitong Garden when the door to the backyard was pushed open and King Zhi drove in. Lu Guang went over to greet him, bowed and said, "The princess is here." Lu Zikan felt happy and watched Gu Huayu get out of the car with a smile. Gu Huayu raised her head and saw Lu Zikan, and asked with a smile on her face, "Sixth master has just arrived." Zikan nodded. Lu Guang glanced at Lu Zikan and stood aside with his hands down. "Let's go into the house and talk. Bring me some melon slices," Gu Huayu said to Lu Zikan, then turned to Lu Guang. The two went to the second floor. Gu Huayu asked in a low voice, "Did you provoke Lu Guang?" Lu Zikan shook his head. He replied in a low voice, "No, it's probably because I came too many times, which made him unhappy. Not just him, King Yu and King Zhu around you were also cold when they saw me. They were clearly not like this before." Gu Huayu nodded and said, "I understand." "What do you understand?" Lu Zikan asked. Gu Huayu turned her head and looked at Lu Zikan, "They protect me. You are engaged now. Do you understand?" How could Lu Zikan not understand? He had to pretend not to understand. "Oh. So that's it? Xiao, I'm so wronged." Gu Huayu glanced at Lu Zikan and said sourly, "What do you have to blame? It's a fact that you are engaged." Lu Zikan pouted aggrievedly and said coquettishly, "Xiao." Gu Huayu entered the room first, followed by Lu Zikan, closing the door behind him, pulling Gu Huayu over and slamming it against the door, trapping Gu Huayu between his hands. Gu Huayu raised her head and looked at Lu Zikan, who was close at hand. She felt the moist breath, her heart beat wildly, and she asked in a trembling voice, "What are you doing?" Lu Zikan looked at Gu Huayu sternly, and after a moment, he held Gu Huayu in his arms. "Xiao, don't be jealous like this in the future. You know, I only have you in my heart." The sourness that had just arisen in Gu Huayu's heart was smoothed away by Lu Zikan. She raised her arms to wrap her arms around Lu Zikan and whispered back, "Okay." Lu Zikan let go of Gu Huayu, raised his hand to smooth her hair, lowered his head and kissed Gu Huayu on the forehead. "Be good, give me some time, I will take care of things. Trust me, okay?" Gu Huayu nodded, "Okay." Lu Zikan liked Gu Huayu's cute look very much. He lowered his head and kissed Gu Huayu's forehead again. "Xiao, you have a beautiful smile. I hope you will always be happy." Gu Huayu gave Lu Zikan a bright smile and said domineeringly, "You have such a charming smile. From now on, you can only smile at me." Lu Zikan pursed his lips and put his head against Gu Huayu's forehead. "Okay, from now on, I will only smile at you." Gu Huayu was satisfied and pulled Lu Zikan to sit on the soft couch. After a while, Lu Guang brought tea. Lu Zikan first took a cup of tea from the tray and placed it in front of Gu Hua, then took his own cup. Gu Huayu placed the fruit tea on the table, and the two of them cooperated very well. After Lu Guang retreated, Lu Ziqin said, "I thought you wouldn't come here today." Gu Huayu looked at Lu Ziqin with a smile on her face and said, "Then come back." Lu Ziqin met Gu Huayu's gaze and said, "Let's try our luck." "You're here, you're lucky." Gu Huayu pursed her lips and said, pretending to be disappointed, "I thought we had a good understanding, but you just got lucky." Lu Ziqin smiled and stretched out his hand to lift Gu Huayu's chin, turning her drooped head towards him. "So, you knew I would come and you also wanted me to come." Gu Huayu didn't reply directly to Lu Ziqin, but asked with a smile, "Isn't that what you think?" Looking at Gu Huayu's cute and lively eyes, Lu Ziqin felt his heart beating so fast. He whispered back, "I hope you will come, but I don't know if you will come. After all, Mrs. Ping and the others have just arrived at Wutong Lane. So, I'm here to try my luck." Lu Ziqin's low voice is very seductive, and his magnetic voice is like the notes played by a cello, making people intoxicated. But when she met Lu Ziqin's affectionate gaze, Gu Huayu looked away embarrassedly and stretched out her hand to smooth the front of Lu Ziqin's clothes to hide her throbbing heart. He said truthfully, "I am very happy to have my grandmother and aunt with me. Whenever there is something happy, I want to share it with you, so I will come over after they are settled. Qinjian, I am very happy today. There are still blood relatives who care about me in this world. I feel that I am not alone and I am very happy." Gu Huayu was really happy. When she looked up at Lu Ziqin, her eyes were as bright as stars. Lu Ziqin looked at Gu Huayu, who was as excited as a child, and his heart softened. He liked to see her happy and contented smile. He wanted to protect her and let her maintain this simple happiness forever. Lu Ziqin held Gu Huayu's hand, nodded and said, "Well, I feel it, and I'm happy for you." After speaking, Lu Ziqin kissed Gu Huayu on the cheek. Just as Gu Huayu was about to return the kiss, there was a knock on the door. Gu Huayu and Lu Ziqin immediately sat up straight. Gu Huayu raised her voice and said, "Come in." Huada opened the door and came in. After seeing the courtesy, he bowed and said, "Princess, Junji is back." Gu Huayu was stunned and asked, "Didn't Junji send Wang to Longzi? How long has it been? Why are you back? Where is he? Where is he?" Huada replied, "Outside the door." "Come in." After Huada looked back at Gu Huayu, he shouted towards the door. Soon, Junji came in with his head lowered. Gu Huayu knew that the mission had failed when she saw his eggplant beating like frost. "Tell me, what's going on?" Junji leaned forward, lowered his head and replied, "Miss Hui, after setting off from the capital, I have been following Wang and Ma Xiaoming. The actor's surname is Ma, and his name is Ma Xiaoming. After leaving the capital and heading west, when they reached the border of Xinqing, Ma Xiaoming struck up a conversation with Xiaoming and said that it was boring to travel alone, so why don't they let Xiaoming go with them, and the three of them would have someone to talk to. The younger one thought about it too, so he joined them. 3 days later, the younger ones arrived in Qingzhou. Mrs. Wang said she was tired from traveling and wanted to rest in Jiangzhou for 2 more days. Ma Xiaoming shook his head and told the younger one that his mother-in-law was very delicate and could only stay in Jiangzhou for 2 more days. Since he was not in a hurry the next day, Ma Xiaoming ordered wine and food to the house during dinner, saying he wanted to have a good drink. As a result, the younger one drank too much. When he woke up the next day, Wang and Ma Xiaoming were nowhere to be seen, and the banknotes on the younger one were also gone. Junji's voice became softer and softer as he spoke, feeling too guilty to dare to raise his head. "If you do something wrong, please punish me." Junji knelt down. Gu Huayu said, "If you take things so lightly, you should be punished. Go down and copy the family rules 500 times. Junji kowtowed, stood up and retreated. Gu Huayu said to Huadadeo, "Wang is a generous person, and this person named Ma is unfaithful. There are too many hidden dangers between these two people. We must find them as soon as possible and take care of them. Hwada said, yes, let's arrange it now. Gu Huayu nodded, go ahead and tell everyone later that you need to be careful when doing things. The mistakes Junji made must not be repeated again. Yes, I understand. Hwada retreated. Gu Huayu sighed heavily. Elvizakin handed the tea into her hand. He comforted, don't worry, it's not a big deal. Gu Huayu sipped her tea and said quietly, there are also reward orders from shopkeepers Huang and shopkeepers on the bulletin board at the entrance of the government office. Wang met shopkeeper Huang and Su Min in Shishan. If she knew about this, many things might happen. Originally, for the sake of being a freshman, I wanted to be a little more polite to her. Luzikin asked, who is the first grade of junior high school? Gu Huayu glanced at Luzikin, put down the cup and explained, Chuyi is the son of the second brother. He was born on the first day of the lunar month. His nickname is Chuyi. Elvizakin nodded, I heard that Wang is very unreasonable. Where did you hear about it? Gu Huayu asked curiously. Luzikin nodded, in order to find you in those years, I asked people to inquire about the people around you. It seems that she is the only one who treats you badly. Gu Huayu said, she only has eyes for herself and can't treat anyone well. She gave birth to Chuyi. There were a lot of nail marks on Chuyi's legs. Chuyi said she pinched them. I really don't know how she could do it. Thinking of the marks on Chuyi's body, Gu Huayu was a little angry. Luzikin consoled her, she has reconciled with your second brother and is no longer involved with your family. Let's not worry about unrelated people. Gu Huayu nodded, suddenly thought of something, raised her head and asked, thank you today for running around for me. Luzikin understood that Gu Huayu was talking about entering the palace. Why are you grateful? It's my honor to work for you. Now that you are the princess, you will be busy now. Shi Mansion, Hua Mansion, and Ping Mansion will definitely hold a banquet for you. In addition, there will be no shortage of posts from various aristocratic families in the capital. Can you cope with the worldly affairs? Having battled wits and courage with Mrs. Yang for many years, Luzikin knew very well that there were too many things going on in the back house, and he was worried that she wouldn't be able to cope with it. Gu Huayu noticed Luzikin's worry and said with a smile, nothing, I just want to be more careful. Besides, my aunt, Yamei and the others are here, so I can't bear the disadvantage. Luzikin thought of what Ye Minghao had entrusted. Speaking of Miss Shi-san, I need your help with something. Gu Huayu asked, what's the matter? Luzikin said while taking the letter from his sleeve pocket, as you know, Minghao is very fond of Miss Shi-san and asks you to help her forward a letter to Miss Shi-san. Gu Huayu said with a smile, hey, Mr. Lulu, who is of good character, has also started to be a matchmaker. Luzikin spread his hands and said helplessly, I can't help it. My grandfather entrusted the Ye family to my hands when he was dying. I have to make arrangements for them one by one. Otherwise, how can I be worthy of my grandfather who is under the 9 springs? Gu Huayu took the letter from Luzikin's hand and asked, how old are you, Mr. Ye? Luzikin casually replied, Minghao is 3 years older than me, Mingqin is half a year older than me, and Minghao is 24 this year. Gu Huayu understood that there were very few men in this era who were 24 and unmarried. You haven't started a family at this age, so your aunt doesn't have to worry about dying. Who says it's not the case? A few days ago, my aunt was worried about illness, Luzikin said distressedly. Gu Huayu pursed her lips, held up the letter in her hand and said, okay, Yamei may come to Wutong Lane tomorrow, and I will hand it over to her then. Elvizakin bowed his hands and said, thank you on behalf of Minghao. Gu Huayu raised her eyebrows, for your sake, I sent the letter. Luzikin raised his hand and rubbed Gu Huayu's head, smiling fondly, I understand. By the way, when I came out of the palace, Aryuan told me about Luziren and my second uncle, and I changed my mind temporarily. No need to trouble Yangyushi. Gu Huayu nodded and said, the development of the situation has exceeded our expectations. I guessed that you would do this. Luzikin smiled and said, we have a good understanding. I didn't expect that this matter would spread quickly throughout the capital. If the people at Yashitai don't impeach the second uncle tomorrow, some people will criticize the officials at Yashitai for not doing what they want. Gu Huayu nodded, we have given a good sword to the wise king's opponent. However, it's a shame for the British public. The position of Minister of War is not low. Hearing the rapid knocking at the door, Gu Huayu and Luzikin looked at each other and said loudly, come in. Aryuan hurriedly opened the door and came in. Luzikin frowned slightly and asked, what's the matter? Aryuan leaned forward and said, sir, the Duke of Guo had someone knock out the child in Tianshui Lane, put him in a sack and threw him into the Shanghe River. The people sent by shopkeeper Miao picked up the child. The child was still breathing. Shopkeeper Miao asked someone to come and ask if he wanted to save him. Without waiting for Luzikin to answer, Gu Huayu said first, that is life, save, why not save? Hurry up to send people over. Aryuan looked at Luzikin, and Luzikin said, send the person over as the princess said. Hurry up and get out. Gu Huayu sighed and said, that's so cruel. That child is not his grandson but also his great-grandson. How could he do it? Luzikin was not surprised at all that the British Association did this. Based on his understanding of the British Duke, this child was not the only one who died in what happened today. By the way, the people who are serving around the second uncle and Luziren are probably not going to survive. Luzikin smiled bitterly, he only has interests in his eyes. How could he care about the life of a child who brings shame to the family? Gu Huayu cursed out loud, things that are inferior to livestock, even tiger poison will not eat its seeds. He is a human being in vain. Gu Huayu wanted to curse a few words, but suddenly she remembered that the person who was inferior to an animal was Luzikin's grandfather. It seemed inappropriate for her to curse like this. Gu Huayu said expressionlessly, you sit down first, I'll go get ready. After saying that, Gu Huayu got up and went to the back room. Luzikin looked at the somewhat annoyed Gu Huayu and asked, do you need my help? Gu Huayu said dryly, no need. Luzikin sighed slightly and thought to himself, he was really in trouble. Gu Huayu went to the back room, turned around and entered the space, took out the tools and medicines she expected to use, and then shouted, Qinjian, come here and help me. End of this chapter. The Rebirth of Space, the lucky girl from a farm family. Author, he would fire every. Chapter 215. Chapter 215 Cruel-Hearted. Elvizikin quickly responded, here he comes. Luzikin entered the back room, and Gu Huayu pointed to the large medical box on the table, help me move to the east room. Okay, Luzikin reached for the box. I'm sorry, my tone was bad just now. I'm not angry at you, I'm just too angry, Gu Huayu apologized. Luzikin was stunned by Gu Huayu's unexpected apology. He immediately put down the box, raised his hand to hug Gu Huayu into his arms, and comforted him in a low voice, no need to apologize, I know. You are a doctor and you pity life. Hearing Luzikin's words, Gu Huayu's heart was shocked. Luzikin understood her. Gu Huayu raised her head and looked at Luzikin, Qinjian, thank you. Luzikin lowered his eyes and looked at Gu Huayu, their eyes met. He saw gratitude and happiness in Gu Huayu's eyes. Gu Huayu smiled at Luzikin and said, they should be here soon. Help me get the medical kit. Luzikin nodded, okay. Luzikin let go of his hand, carried the medical box, and followed Gu Huayu to the east house. Luzikin saw a simple bed in the middle of the room, with many unknown things placed on top of the bed and around it. Gu Huayu pointed to the table next to her and said, Qingjian, put the box here. Lu Ziqin placed the box at the location designated by Gu Huayu and looked at the furnishings in the room curiously. Xiao, what are these? Gu Huayu explained, this is a simple operating room. Huada opened the door and came in, Miss, we're here. Gu Huayu nodded and ordered, bring the people in and let Ruhi come in to help. The rest of the people should not come in. The flowers are so big that I can't bear to do anything. Gu Huayu said to Lu Ziqin, you should also go outside. Lv Ziqin understood that the only thing needed to people from the hands of the King of Hell was time. So he nodded, turned around and walked out. At the door, he met Huada holding Bauer with blood on his face, and hurriedly stepped aside. Lu Ziqin turned to look at Gu Huayu. Gu Huayu happened to look this way and said, don't worry, let's go out first. Lu Ziqin nodded and retreated out of the door. Huada put Bauer on the operating bed and turned around. Seeing Lu Ziqin standing at the door, he bowed and greeted, Master 6, come and sit here. Judging from the child's injury, the princess will not come out so soon. Lu Ziqin nodded and followed Huada back to the previous hall. Huada asked someone to change tea for Lu Ziqin again and was about to leave. Lu Ziqin called out, Huada, you also sit down. Huada hesitated for a moment and said politely, thank you, Mr. Lu. I have other things to do, so I can't accompany Mr. Lu. Lu Ziqin nodded, nothing, just go and do your work. After Huada retreated, Ruan looked at the door and asked, Sir, the people around the princess seem to have changed. Everyone is polite and distant. Why? Lu Ziqin smiled bitterly and asked, what's going on at the Duke's mansion? Yuan leaned forward and said, the second master and the people around him were all killed with sticks. Sure enough, none of these people were spared. Lu Ziqin felt a chill in his heart, nodded and said, I understand, is there anything else? Yuan continued, the letter I received from the dark. This time, the Duke of Guo did not use the long shadow guards, but used a man named Wind Valley. Feng Gu, who is this? Lu Ziqin raised his head and asked. Yuan leaned forward and said, Master, I'm still checking. Lu Ziqin nodded and ordered, find it out as soon as possible. After Yuan retired, Lu Ziqin fell into deep thought. In addition to the Lunjing guards, his grandfather also raised other people. What is he going to do? Lv Ziqin waited outside for more than an hour when Ruhi opened the door and came out. Lu Ziqin looked into the room and asked, how is it? Are you okay? Ruhi leaned back and said, it's almost done, the master is still sewing stitches. Yuan, bring some water. Master, Lu Ziqin asked, looking at Ruhi who was beaming with joy. Ruhi nodded towards Lu Ziqin with raised eyebrows, well, Dr. Gu has accepted me as his disciple. Lu Ziqin still wanted to ask more questions, but Qingyu came over with water and said, here comes the water. Ruhi took the basin and walked inside, Master, I have a small favor. I will tell you more about it later. Qingyu followed him in. Gu Huayu sewed the last stitch, cut off the thread, and told Qingyu, wash and disinfect the tools and put them away. If you follow Qingyu and learn to wash utensils, study seriously, and I will do spot checks later. Gigi bowed and responded, yes, Master. Gu Huayu washed her hands and said to Lu Ziqin, let's go out and let the child rest. Lu Ziqin looked at Bauer who was wrapped like a dumpling on the bed, and walked out with Gu Huayu. The two of them returned to the meeting hall, and Gu Huayu slumped down on the soft couch, I'm so exhausted. Lu Ziqin stepped forward and poured a cup of tea for Gu Huayu, thank you for your hard work, drink some tea. How is it? Can you survive? Gu Huayu took the cup and took a sip of tea, shook her head and said, I don't know, I'll try my best, and I'll see to him next. Even if he survives, I'm worried that something will go wrong with him. Gu Huayu pointed with her finger. Luzikin sighed, you tried your best, it depends on his luck. Gu Huayu sighed, this is the only way. Your grandfather is so cruel. Luzikin pushed the snack box in front of Gu Huayu, eat something to replenish your strength. He is a cold-hearted person, so we won't mention him. Gu Huayu reached for a piece of mung bean cake and said, it tastes good, have some. Luzikin shook his head, no, you eat, I don't like sweets. Gu Huayu stopped talking and started eating. After an operation, it took a lot of energy. Luzikin saw that Gu Huayu was a little tired and handed the teacup over, it's too dry. Drink some tea. Eat and go to sleep for a while. I'll keep watch here. Gu Huayu shook her head and said, no, the child may not wake up until tomorrow afternoon. You didn't sleep well last night, so go back and rest early. Luzikin thought about it and said, okay, I'll come back tomorrow afternoon. Gu Huayu stood up and said, I'll see you off. Luzikin shook his head, no, you go and have a rest. Gu Huayu insisted on sending Luzikin into the car. Luzikin couldn't resist her, so he had to let her go. When Aryuan saw Luzikin coming out, he raised his voice and shouted, Ruhi, it's time to go. When Ruhi came out of the operating room, he looked back reluctantly and asked, Sir, are you going back? Luzikin glanced at Ruhi and knew that he was reluctant to leave, so he said, Xiao is busy these days. Ruhi should stay and help. Ruhi happily bowed his hands and said, thank you, master. Luzikin's car left the backyard. Gu Huayu stared at the door in a daze. He left, and she missed him a little. This discovery shocked Gu Huayu. Since when had she been so clingy? Miss, Huada shouted not far away. Gu Huayu turned to look at Huada, seeing that Huada was about to speak but stopped. Gu Huayu understood what he was worried about and said, don't worry, he won't let me down. However, Mr. Liu is engaged now, so it's not fair to the young lady, Huada said. Gu Huayu nodded, okay, from now on I won't see him again until he breaks off the engagement. I'm doing this for your own good, Huada bowed and said. I understand, Gu Huayu said happily. As the car drove onto the street, Luzikin asked, do you know about Gu Jinnan's daughter-in-law, Mrs. Wang? Aryuan replied, Master Hui, I know. Wang went to Longzi with an actor named Ma Xiaoming. Luzikin said, Wang and Ma Xiaoming got Junqi drunk with wine in Qingzhou, stole the money from Junqi, and left without returning to Longzi. Wang staying here is a hidden danger to Xiao, and this person cannot stay. Send the order to get rid of Wang and Ma Xiaoming. Aryuan bowed and responded, yes, I understand, little one. The next day, Gu Huayu got up early and returned to Wutong Lane to accompany Mrs. Ping and Mrs. Wang to have breakfast. After breakfast, Gu Huayu accompanied Mrs. Ping in the main room to talk about home affairs. Miss, the master, and his wife are back, Liandong came in and reported. After hearing this, Mrs. Ping reached out and groped forward, thinking of getting up and walking out. Yan Ran, are your father and mother back? Let's go out to greet her. Gu Huayu stretched out her hand to support Mrs. Ping. Okay, Grandma, please slow down, we are not in a hurry. Gu Huayu helped Mrs. Ping out of the Chihuahua gate. Gu Dichang and Wan Qi came over with Gu Chengqiao, Gu Jinnan, Wan Xiaoshuang, and others. Gu Dichang saw Gu Huayu supporting Mrs. Ping, stepped forward in 2 steps, bowed and said, hello, madam, I'm here, Gu Dichang. Mrs. Ping groped over looking for the sound, hello Dichang, where is Lai Feng? You are such good people. I am grateful that you will raise Yan Ran. I thank you. As he said this, Mrs. Ping was about to kneel down. Gu Dichang was so frightened that he quickly pulled Mrs. Ping back. When Mrs. Ping was about to kneel down, Mrs. Wan stepped forward and took Mrs. Ping's right hand. The couple held Mrs. Ping's hand on the left and right. Gu Dichang said, "Old madam, I can't do it. It's our duty to raise Xiao." Back then, if madam hadn't begged me to be with Xiao Feng, where would I be? Wan Qi took over the words, "Old madam, madam, you are our benefactor." Gu Huayu came over to greet Gu Dichang and Mr. Wan, and said, "Grandma, father and mother, it's hot outside, let's go inside and talk." Gu Dichang said, "Old madam, I will help you into the house." Mrs. Ping couldn't see her eyes, but she could feel the kindness of Gu Dichang and his wife. She nodded and said, "Okay." Entering the main room, Gu Dichang helped Mrs. Ping sit down at the head, turned around and bowed to Mrs. Wang, "Hello, sister-in-law." Mrs. Wang returned the favor with her blessings. After Mrs. Wang sat down, Gu Chengqiao, Gu Chennan and others came forward to greet Mrs. Ping and Mrs. Wang. There were many people in the house, and it was very lively. The courtyard was filled with laughter and laughter. Soon, a servant came in and said, "Miss, Mrs. Ping from the Shi mansion has come over with her family." Gu Huayu said to Gu Dichang and Wan, "Mom and Dad, let's go out to greet them." Gu Dichang and Wan Qi had already stood up. "Okay, let's go." Gu Chennan, Gu Chengqiao, Gu Chengwan and others stood up and said, "Let's go too." Mrs. Wang also stood up and said, "I will accompany you to make an introduction." Gu Huayu said with a smile, "Okay, we don't understand many of the rules. My aunt will mention more later." Mrs. Wang was worried about Wan's restraint, so she said with a smile, "Yingzi is my niece's niece. She is straightforward and charitable. She is a sweet-tempered person who doesn't pay attention to rules and etiquette. Over the years, we have relied on her care." Speaking, Mrs. Wang gave an overview of the situation in the Shi mansion so that Gu Dichang and Wan Qi could have an idea. A group of people came to the gate of the mansion and saw the carriages and horses of Shi mansion approaching. Gu Huayu was startled when she saw a group of people and horses. Looking at this posture, could it be that everyone from the Shi family was here? Mrs. Wang was also stunned, and then said to Gu Huayu, "The ones walking in front are your eldest cousin Shi Heshi, your second cousin Shi Hekang, and behind them are the fourth cousin Shi Hegu, the fifth oldest Shi Heshan, and the sixth cousin Shi Hekao. Look. Come, everyone from the Shi family is here." As he spoke, Shi mansion's carriages and horses arrived at the door. Shi Heshi and Shi Hekang got off their horses and bowed to Mrs. Wang, "Auntie, Princess, Uncle Gu, Auntie, hello everyone." Mrs. Ping got out of the car and said with a smile, "I wanted to come over when I received the letter yesterday, but Jing Yetu stopped me and said that you guys had just come over and you must be very busy and wouldn't let me come over to cause trouble. That's why I came over today." Yang Jing smiled and corrected, "Mom, my daughter-in-law didn't say anything about causing trouble. She said she wanted my aunt and uncle to rest first." Mrs. Ping laughed and said, "Your words sound nicer, but they actually mean the same thing. This is Mr. Gu and his siblings. Thank you for these years." With that said, Mrs. Ping greeted Gu Dichang and Wan Qi Fusion, and Gu Dichang and Wan Qi hurriedly returned the greetings. Mrs. Ping turned around and introduced her family to Gu Dichang and Wan. "This is Princess Jinglian." Wan didn't expect that the princess was the daughter-in-law of the Shi family, so she didn't know how to greet her. Gu Huayu noticed Wan's embarrassment and said softly, "Auntie, do it with me." With that said, Gu Huayu took a step forward and greeted Princess Jinglian. Princess Jinglian stepped forward and held Gu Huayu's hand, smiling and saying, "So we are a family. No wonder I liked you so much when I saw you that day. Gu Huayu is blessed again, Princess sister-in-law must take more care of her in the future." Princess Jinglian responded generously, "No questions asked. My sister-in-law will support you in the future. If someone bullies you without a long-sighted mind, it will not only be me who will stand up for you. See, you also have a bunch of brothers, all of them 10 proficient in all 8 martial arts. Princess Jinglian said and pointed to the side. Gu Huayu came to pay homage to the brothers of the Shi family. From now on, Xiao will have to rely on all the brothers. Shi Heshi smiled and said, Yan Ran will be like Yamei from now on, free and living as she pleases. If someone dares to bully you, my brothers will stand up for you and bully you back. Although there was no need for the Shi brothers to stand up for themselves, Gu Huayu was still very moved when she heard such words and thanked her profusely. Mrs. Ping smiled and took over the words, Yan Ran, they are brothers. It is their duty to protect their sister. There is no need to thank you. Mrs. Wang said with a smile, let's talk about it in the house first, don't let it dry in the sun here. Gu Dichang and Gu Jinnan welcomed the Shi brothers to the main room in the outer courtyard. The female family members went to the main room in the backyard to talk. They had just sat down for a long time when a servant came in and said, Miss, Huaqing Palace has sent a congratulatory gift. Mrs. Ping said to Gu Hua, everyone in the palace or the various aristocratic families are watching the emperor's actions. The emperor will make you a princess, and the empresses in the palace will give you rewards. Then all the noble families will follow suit to congratulate you. Let the servants register and put the gifts in the warehouse. If someone's family has something to do later, just give them gifts according to their wishes. End of this chapter. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Rebirth of Space, the lucky girl from a farm family. Author, he would fire every. Chapter 216. Chapter 216 Etiquette. Gu Huayu leaned over to thank Mrs. Ping for the reminder, then turned around and told Huada and Wang Gu to do these things. Shi Yamei said with some suspicion, the emperor just made Xiao a princess, not a princess. Are the empresses of the palaces trying to give gifts? Mrs. Ping glanced at Shi Yamei and sighed, I usually ask you to learn to be a housekeeper, but you always don't pay attention. What can I say about you? We were talking about giving gifts in the palace, why did it involve me again? Shi Yamei lowered his head and muttered. Yang Jing smiled and took Shi Yamei's hand and said, Mother is right, she wants you to learn to take care of the family affairs, just to learn these worldly things. The empresses of each palace gave gifts to Xiao. Some of them wanted to please the emperor, some did not want to follow the truth, and some of them sincerely congratulated Xiao. Shi Yamei pouted and said, it's so troublesome, how can Xiao tell who is sincere and who is fake? Yang Jing asked, why does Xiao have to distinguish these things? Xiao just accept them all as gifts. You have to learn to take care of the housework when you get back. Shi Yamei turned to Mingzin Mingzi and said, you two go outside to see who has come to congratulate you. I want to see if the second sister-in-law is right. As expected by Mrs. Ping, just as the congratulatory gifts from Huaqing Palace arrived, the congratulatory gifts from Viang Palace arrived, followed by those from Yongning Palace and Jingyang Palace. Not only the empresses in the palace sent congratulatory gifts, but also congratulatory gifts from several royal palaces. As Mingzin and Mingzi came in alternately to report, Mrs. Ping looked at Shi Yamei and asked, are you convinced? Go back and take care of the housework for me. Shi Yamei lowered his head and responded, I understand. Not long after, a servant came to report, Miss, just received the post. Mrs. Yan from Ping Mansion came to the door with her family to congratulate her. Ping Fu. That's my grandmother's natal family. Gu Huayu looked at Mrs. Ping and was about to ask a question. Before Gu Huayu could speak, Mrs. Ping snorted coldly, she is running very fast now. When she usually goes to Wanfu, she only sits in the east courtyard and doesn't want to step through the door of the west courtyard. From the look on Mrs. Ping's face, Gu Huayu knew that Mrs. Yan's relationship with them was not harmonious. Seeing Gu Huayu looking at MRS Ping in confusion, MRS Wang explained, A Niang has 3 brothers and sisters. A Niang has 2 elder brothers. The eldest uncle Ping Feng Bao is Yingzi's father, who passed away more than 10 years ago. In addition to Yingzi, there is another son in the uncle's room. He is Yingzi's brother, named Ping Jizong. He is now the magistrate of Mingzhou, and his wife Miao and their children are accompanying him. Second uncle Ping Fenggui also passed away 6 years ago. The second uncle has 2 legitimate sons. The eldest son Ping Jisen is now a minor official in Taipu Temple, and the second son Ping Jixing is a county magistrate in Huangzhou. At present, the Ping Jisen family remains in Beijing. Yan and the eldest wife of Wanfu, Yan, are cousins who have not been born in the 5th service. MRS Wang told Gu Huayu the situation of the Ping family in a few words. Gu Huayu understood, nodded, and said, "Thank you, Aunt, I understand. I'll go to the gate to greet you." MRS Ping took the words and said, "Go to the main gate." Yamei can accompany Yan ran to the second gate to greet her. "If you want to follow my instructions, don't go and greet her. She won't come if you like." MRS Ping sighed and said, "Go and greet him, he is a guest. We cannot lack etiquette." MRS Wang said to Gu Huayu, "Listen to your grandmother and go and greet her." Gu Huayu said to Shi Yamei, "Yamei, let's go there." "Okay." Shi Yamei stood up and walked out with Gu Huayu. The two of them walked to the corridor. Gu Huayu took the opportunity to hand Ye Minghao's letter to Shi Yamei. "Here, your letter." Shi Yamei's expression was stagnant. He looked at the letter in Gu Huayu's hand without reaching out to take it. He asked, "Who gave it to you? Is Ye Minghao right?" Seeing that Shi Yamei didn't answer, Gu Huayu asked, "What's wrong? Are you still angry with him? Then I will return the letter." Shi Yamei took the letter angrily and said angrily, "He is already on a blind date, why should he write me a letter? What does he want to do?" Gu Huayu spread her hands, "How do I know this? Maybe, he told you what he wanted to do in his letter." Shi Yamei lowered his head to open the letter, when Gu Huayu saw a woman wearing a black gold cloud embroidered shirt and a woman wearing a pomegranate red gauze skirt walking over. The reminder, when people come, put the letter away and read it again when you go back. Shi Yamei looked up and saw MRS Yan with a smile on her face and Ping Peinyun who was one step behind Yan. She put the letter away and said to MRS Yan, "Auntie." Yan she looked at Gu Huayu with his eyes, and responded to Shi Yamei's words, "Yamei has arrived. Is this the princess? She is so beautiful, she looks like your mother-in-law." Shi Yamei looked at Gu Huayu and replied rudely, "My mother-in-law is obviously more like her father in Xiao." Being snatched away by Shi Yamei, Yan was not embarrassed at all, and said with a smile, "Yamei, don't worry, I haven't finished speaking yet. I said the princess is more like her mother and more like her father." Gu Huayu stood on the side with a smile and watched Shi Yamei and Yan's exchange of blows. Shi Yamei gave Bai Yan a disgusted look and said, "Yes, Aunt is right. Xiao is more like aunt than uncle." Yan ignored Shi Yamei, turned around and said to Ping Peinyun behind her, "Xiaoun, come quickly and pay tribute to the princess." "Princess, this is my little girl Ping Peinyun, who is 2 years younger than you." Ping Peinyun took a step forward and said to Gu Huayu, "Hello, princess." Gu Huayu returned the favor and said, "Hello Xiaoun, please come inside." With that said, Gu Huayu politely allowed the two of them to go inside. Yan asked warmly as she walked, "Are you okay, Aunt? I am most happy that the princess is back. In the years since the princess has been away, my aunt has been most concerned about the princess. For the princess, my aunt shed so many tears that she went blind from crying. The emperor paid off, and the aunt finally brought the princess back." Gu Huayu turned her head to look at Yan, and couldn't help but admire her. Yan was a good talker. I knew clearly that what she said was flattering, but it didn't sound unpleasant to my ears. Shiyame corrected, "Auntie, don't talk nonsense. My aunt's eyes are not blind from crying, nor are she blind. My aunt's eyes have nebula, which can be cured." Yan's speech was once again overtaken by Yan's words. A trace of displeasure flashed in his eyes, but it was not shown on his face. Then he smiled and said, "Really? That's fine. With the princess coming back and my aunt's eyes can be cured again, it's a double happiness for our family." "Yame, was it the imperial doctor invited from the palace to treat my aunt?" "It's the imperial doctor hired by the princess for her aunt, right? The princess is really filial. From now on, with the princess taking care of her, my aunt will live a good life." Gu Huayu was afraid that Shiyame would spill the beans, so she took over the words, "No, he is a doctor who travels around." Before Gu Huayu finished speaking, Yan interrupted her, "A doctor who travels around? The princess can't just believe anything. There are too many charlatans these days, so be careful not to be fooled. These charlatans are so despicable that they only rely on their mouths to blow things up, but in fact they have no ability at all. After taking your money and walking away, who are you looking for?" Gu Huayu never expected that one day she would be called a charlatan who boasted. He patiently explained, "No, this doctor doesn't take anything from you." Yan immediately said, "That's even more unbelievable. If your aunt is blinded, how can you argue with him?" Shiyame looked at Yan, who was still trying to persuade Gu Huayu, and said impatiently, "We're here." Mrs. Yan raised her head and saw the door of the hall, smiled and stepped across the threshold, and walked towards Mrs. Ping, who was standing above her. "Hello, aunt, it is not in vain that you have fasted and prayed to Buddha for many years, prayed to bodhisattvas everywhere, and moved God. God sent the princess to you. Come to your old side." Shiyame stood at the door, looked at Yan, and said softly, "She is a complete flatterer. I have never seen her treat my aunt so affectionately." Gu Huayu glanced at Ping Peinyun, who was standing by the side, stretched out her hand to pull Shiyame, and gave her a wink. Shiyame looked at Peinyun, curled his lips and stopped talking. As soon as Gu Huayu sat down, a servant came in and said, "Princess, the eldest young Master Li and the second young Master Li from the Li mansion came over to celebrate." The second young Master Li said he had a gift and wanted to hand it over to the princess himself. Gu Huayu said to Mrs. Ping, "Grandma, let me go and take a look." Shiyame didn't want to see Yan's flattery, so he stood up and said, "Xiao, I'll let you go." Gu Huayu nodded, "Let's go, together." They came to the second gate and saw Li Tao holding a sandalwood box in one hand and a folding fan in the other, leaning against the pillar of the corridor, looking bored. Gu Huayu couldn't help but want to laugh. This guy was in this posture every time, and it seemed like he didn't have any bones in his body. Li Tao saw Gu Huayu coming out, stood up straight, raised the box in his hand, and said, "Congratulations to the princess." Gu Huayu reached out and took the box, raised her eyebrows and said, "Thank you." Shiyame asked curiously, "What's in the box?" As he said that, Shiyame reached for it. Li Tao hurriedly stopped him. "Shi-san, can you be more conscious? This gift box is not for you." Shiyame said cut and said, "You are so stingy, let's see if you can get rid of one piece." Li Tao ordered to Gu Huayu, "Gu Xiao, please put the box away and don't show it to outsiders. Do you understand?" Shiyame raised her foot and kicked Li Tao. "Outsider? You understand, Xiao is my cousin, and you are the outsider. I don't care, this gift can only be seen by Xiao Yu, no one else is allowed to see it," Li Tao solemnly explained. Gu Huayu asked, "What gift is in the box?" Li Tao's attitude made her hesitate, wondering whether she should accept the gift. Li Tao seemed to have read Gu Huayu's thoughts and said, "It's a worthless gadget. I'm afraid that Shi-san will laugh at it, so she's not allowed to look at it." Gu Huayu felt relieved and took the box in her hand. Thank you, I'll take it. After speaking, Gu Huayu solemnly thanked Li Defu. Thank you brothers for coming to congratulate me, thank you. Li Tao waved his hand and said, come on, we don't care about this between us. I am happy for you to be named the princess. You are very busy today, so I won't disturb you. Leave some of your warm sun for me bottle, I'll go to Daowen Street to get it another day. Gu Huayu nodded and said, okay, I'll go to Huayu Pavilion another day and I'll treat you to tea. Li Tao nodded, shook his folding fan, turned around and walked out. After taking 2 steps, he turned to Gu Huayu and said carelessly, Xiao, be careful when you act in the future. If you encounter anything, take the one I gave you last time. Jade pendant, go to Xing Jiaogang and someone will help you. Gu Huayu was stunned, and then she thanked her again, thank you, I'll note it down. Shi Yame looked at Li Tao's back and asked, Xiao, what does Li Er mean? Someone is doing something bad to you. Gu Huayu looked away and said calmly, I don't know either. I'll just accept his kindness. Shi Yame said, that's right, Li Er has always been loyal and is a friend worth making. Gu Huayu nodded, let's go back. Gu Huayu and Shi Yame returned to the back hall, but before they could sit down, Wang Gu came in and said, Princess, Commander Hua has come over to the mansion. He said he would come to see the old lady, Madam Uncle, and take the princess back to Hua Mansion. The people present looked at each other and took Gu Huayu back. Does this mean that you can pick it up as soon as you want, and you can take it back if you want? Mrs. Ping said calmly, this Lu family has lived in vain for many years. She doesn't even understand the basic rules. Mrs. Wang smiled dryly and said, Ms. Lu has been the mistress of the house for many years, so she doesn't understand these rules. She must be deliberately scornful. Gu Huayu looked at Wang Qin and said, Aunt Wang, let him in. Wang Qin leaned forward and exited. Mrs. Ping was afraid that Gu Huayu was young and ignorant, so she reminded her, Yan Ran, you can't go back with Huaru Iming. Gu Huayu smiled at Mrs. Ping and said, don't worry, Auntie, I understand. Mrs. Ping wanted to say something else, but when she saw Huaru Iming coming in behind Aunt Wang, she swallowed her words. Wang Qin bowed to Gu Huayu respectfully and said, Princess, Commander Hua is here. Gu Huayu waved her hand and said, go down. Wang Qin retreated. Huaru Iming saw Wang Qin's respectful look and thought to himself that Xiao Nazai is quite capable. Gu Huayu saw Huaru Iming standing at the door stupidly, and did not greet him, letting him stand like this. Huaru Iming was stunned for a moment, came back to his senses, looked around and saw that the room was full of people, and first went to Princess Jinglian to greet her. Then he cast his gaze on the blind woman who was holding the beads in his hand. He determined that this person was Mrs. Ping. He walked forward and bowed his hands in greeting, saying, well done, madam. My junior, Huaru Iming, would like to pay my respects to Mrs. Ping. Mrs. Ping continued to take care of the prayer beads and responded calmly, hello, Mr. Hua, thank you for coming to see me. At that time, my son-in-law died in an unknown manner, Hua's house was in a fire, and my daughter was buried in the flames. Mrs. Ping had no doubts about Hua Su, but she was suffering from the lack of evidence and could not judge Hua Su, but she hated Hua Su a lot in her heart. Huaru Iming thought that the old lady Ping would say a few polite words, but the old lady replied dryly to him and stopped talking, leaving him to move forward and retreat in disobedience. Huaru Iming was stunned for a moment, turned to Mrs. Wang in embarrassment, and bowed towards Mrs. Wang. Mrs. Wang nodded slightly and said, thank you, Commander Hua, you are considerate. This time, Huaru Iming did not stop. After paying homage to Mrs. Wang, he turned around to pay homage to Mrs. Ping. Mrs. Ping smiled and nodded, and asked, Commander Hua came here alone? Didn't Mrs. Lu and Mrs. Lu come together? Huaruiming leaned back and said, my mother injured her leg a few days ago and can't walk. Ziqiu is at home to serve her mother, so she didn't go with her. Mrs. Ping nodded clearly, oh, so that's it? End of this chapter. The Rebirth of Space, the lucky girl from a farm family. Author, he would fire every. Chapter 217. Chapter 217 Punishment. Huaruiming cupped his hands to Yang Jing and others, then turned to look at Gu Huayu. Miss Gu, I am very happy to know that you are Yan Ran. Mother is also very happy to know that you are still alive. Last night we lit incense in the ancestral hall and told the uncle, his wife, and the ancestors of the Hua family that you were back, Yan Ran. When I went out today, my mother repeatedly told me that I must take you back to recognize your ancestors. When my mother's legs and feet are healed, we can go back to the old house in Jiangnan to worship our ancestors. Gu Huayu looked at Huaruiming, who did not regard her as an outsider, bowed slightly and said, thank you, Commander-in-Chief, Mrs. Yelu, you are considerate. After I returned to Beijing, I went to the old house on Yongchun Road to offer incense and pay homage to my father and mother. I won't go to the Huafu on West Street. At first, the princess's mansion given to me by the emperor was rebuilt on the old house on Yongchun Road. I can move in next year, and it will be troublesome to move around. Secondly, my father-in-law and mother-in-law who raised me, and my brothers and sisters from the Gu family who grew up with me also came to the capital with me. I can't put them aside and go to the Hua mansion to be the eldest lady. Furthermore, now that my grandmother, aunt, and cousin live together with me, it's not practical to drag the whole family to Huafu, right? Huaruiming didn't expect that Gu Huayu would reject him. He lost his mind for a moment, and the eagerness in his eyes dimmed. After discussing with his mother last night, they unanimously decided to take Gu Huayu back to Hua Mansion. He knew that the reason why his mother was willing to take Gu Huayu back was because she was a girl and was about to get her hair cut. Lu was thinking of taking Gu Huayu back to raise her for a year and a half, and then find someone to find a relative for Gu Huayu and send him away. In the circle of aristocratic families in the capital, Mrs. Lu became a lifelong event for Princess Zhou, and she had earned enough face. Huaruiming met Gu Huayu in Fanlu and had the idea of taking it for himself. When he learned that Gu Huayu was Hua Yan Ran, he sighed that God would help him. Huaruiming thought that if he took Gu Huayu back, he could be close to the water. With his many years of experience in Hualu, he did not believe that he could not get Gu Huayu. As for ethics, he and she are not really cousins. There is no blood relationship between them. Mother and son have their own agendas, but their goals are the same. Neither of them thought that Gu Huayu would refuse to return to Hua Mansion. From the perspective of Huaruiming and Lu, Gu Huayu will be happy to return to Hua Mansion, because even if Gu Huayu is named the princess, she will still be helpless in the capital. They took the initiative to take her back to the Hua Mansion and use the Hua family as her support. Gu Huayu should be grateful. He never expected that Gu Huayu would refuse to go back. Huaruiming was panicked for a moment and quickly analyzed the pros and cons for Gu Huayu. She smiled apologetically and said, Yan Ran is really a member of our Hua family, who values love and justice. However, Yan Ran should think about my proposal carefully and not reject it in a hurry. It will be more beneficial for you to go back to Huafu. As for your adoptive parents and Mrs. Ping, they can go to Hua Mansion together. It's just to support more people, it's not like our family can't afford it. After hearing Huaruiming's words, Gu Huayu couldn't help but frown, and said impatiently, thank you, Commander Hua, for your kindness. I think my point has been made very clear. I live with my father, mother, and grandmother, and I will not go back to Huafu. Commander Hua must be very busy in charge of the huge dragon shadow guard. Commander Hua, please come back. Gu Huayu issued an order to expel the guests, which made Huaruiming feel a little embarrassed. He scolded Gu Huayu in his heart for being ignorant, and said, Yan Ran, I am your brother, and I am doing everything for your own good. Gu Huayu replied with a half smile, I'm sorry, my parents only gave birth to me. I never had an older brother. Commander Hua, please don't recognize your relatives randomly. Gu Huayu's previous words made Huaru Iming feel alienated. These words made Huaru Iming feel Gu Huayu's hostility. Huaru Iming looked at Gu Huayu inexplicably, he didn't understand. I came to take Gu Huayu back to Hua Mansion with good intentions, but Gu Huayu didn't appreciate it. Why was she hostile to him? Yan Ran, is there any misunderstanding between us? Huaru Iming asked in confusion. Gu Huayu didn't want to say more, so she just replied calmly, there is no misunderstanding between us. What I said is the truth. Commander Hua, please invite me. After speaking, Gu Huayu raised her voice and shouted, Aunt Wang, see the guest off. Wang Qin came in, bowed to Huaru Iming and said, Commander Hua, please. Huaru Iming sighed and said unwillingly, Yan Ran, I have a good intention, please think about it carefully. Huaru Iming walked out and looked back at Gu Huayu. Gu Huayu stopped paying attention to Huaru Iming, picked up the cup in front of her and took a sip of tea to calm down the nausea that was rising in her heart. Pingxi looked at Huaru Iming walking away and said, Liu's abacus is so good that he made everyone else look stupid. Shi Yame curled his lips and said, a self-righteous person is so stupid that he thinks he is smart. Mrs. Ping looked at Gu Huayu and reminded, Yan Ran, Huaru Iming didn't take you back today, Mrs. Lu may come to visit in person another day. Mrs. Lu is very scheming, you have to be careful of her. Gu Huayu leaned over and said, thank you, Auntie, I know what I'm doing. Princess Jinglian smiled and said, Mom, I'm relieved, Xiao is a decisive person. Commander Hua didn't get any benefit from Xiao just now. Yang Jing took the words with a smile, what the princess said makes me want to see how Xiao will fight against Mrs. Lu. Xiao, if Mrs. Lu delivers the post, you can have someone deliver a letter to the Shi Mansion, and I will come and watch the fun. How can the fun be without me? I'll come too. Shi Yame followed. Gu Huayu understood in her heart why Yang Jing, who grew up in a scholarly family, liked to participate in such trivial worldly affairs. The reason why she said this was just to help her and come here to embolden her. When you come, don't forget me. Send a letter to the princess's mansion and I will join in the fun, Princess Jinglian said with great interest. Compared with the liveliness of Wutong Lane, the British government can be regarded as gloomy. Last night, when the second master and the people in the uncle's yard were beaten to death with sticks, the servants of the house huddled in their rooms and listened to the sounds outside. At first, you could still hear the sound of struggling, and then there was a squeaking sound, but then no more sound was heard. The servants were all trembling and cautious, fearing that they would be punished next. Early this morning, the British Duke asked Lu Dingning to take a leave of absence and ordered people to keep an eye on what was going on in the court. Lu Dingning and Lu Xiran were punished by the British public to think about their mistakes in the ancestral hall. They were not released for a day and a night, and they did not know what happened in the mansion. Lu Dingning said to the guard guarding the door, let Yang Zuzi come over. I have something to say to him. The nurse stood up straight and ignored him. Seeing that the nurse didn't answer him, Lu Dingning turned around in a circle upset. After a while, he turned to the door again, looked at him and said, send someone to report, I want to see the Duke. You evildoer, you still have the nerve to see me. The British Duke led Du Ben into the ancestral hall. Hearing the British Duke's voice, Lu Dingning shivered in fright, shrank his shoulders, and stammered, Father, Father. The British Duke glared at Lu Dingning, didn't I ask you to kneel down? Lu Dingning lowered his head and replied in a low voice, Father, my son is already 40 years old. If you kneel for a day and a night, you will die on your knees. Father, my son realizes his mistake. Look, Your son has knelt down and has been punished. It's time for you to calm down. Your son still has to go to court, so you can let him out, okay? The British Duke was so angry that he puffed his beard and glared. Do you remember going to court? When you were fighting with your son for a woman, did you remember that you were a court official? Do you remember that court officials are not allowed to have with prostitutes or have extramarital affairs? Daxing officials are not allowed to have outside rooms. This is a rule set by the late emperor. The cause was Princess Xinyu, the sister of the late emperor's mother. The husband-in-law of Princess Xinyu, Prince Consort Han, was originally a poor student. He was ranked first in high school in the scientific examination. When Emperor Renzong learned that he was unmarried, he betrothed his beloved daughter, Princess Xinyu, to him. During the reign of Emperor Renzong, Han's consort and Princess Xinyu were also very close to each other, and they were loving husband and wife. After the death of Emperor Renzong, the consort of Han gradually neglected Princess Xinyu. The eldest princess of Xinyu was so ashamed and angry when she learned that Han's consort was in the outer room, and finally killed herself with 3 feet of white silk. The late emperor and Princess Xinyu had a deep relationship since childhood. After learning the cause of Princess Xinyu's death, he executed the Han concubine and his wife's concubine together. From then on, officials were not allowed to keep the concubine. Lu Dingning lowered his head and did not dare to say anything. The British Duke glanced at Lu Dingning and looked around. He didn't see Lu Xiren and asked, "Where is Xiren?" Lu Dingning pointed to the room and said, "Still sleeping." The British father walked into the house and saw Lu Xiren sleeping soundly on the futons with several futons on his back. The British Duke stepped forward and kicked Lu Xiren. Lu Xiren woke up from the pain and muttered, "Oh, who doesn't have the foresight to hit me?" When Lu Xiren opened his eyes and saw the British Duke clearly, he quickly stood up and knelt down. "Grandpa." The British Duke pointed his finger at Lu Xiren and was so angry that he could not speak. Du Ben brought a group chair for the British Duke. "My lord, please sit down." The British master was so angry that he turned around in a circle, stretched out his hand to pull the group chair and sat down. He pointed to the side of Lu Xiren and said to Lu Dingning, "You also kneel down with me." Du Ben was afraid that the British Duke would be angry, so he reminded him softly, "My lord, please calm down. Your health is important." Lu Dingning bowed his head and walked over and knelt down. The British Duke looked at his son and grandson in front of him, pointed at them, and sighed heavily, "Unworthy things." Lu Dingning and Lu Xiren lowered their heads, waiting for the British father's violent beatings and scoldings. When Du Ben saw the person who went to inquire about the news coming back, he hurriedly walked to the door, listened to the report of the person, and then returned to the house. "My lord, there is news. Regarding what happened yesterday, many people impeached the second master this morning. The emperor was furious in court, and dismissed the second master from his post, as well as the eldest son, and the eldest son's errand, and he will never be hired again." The British Duke was sitting in the regimental chair, raised his foot and kicked Lu Dingning, scolding, "Did you hear that? The good things you did, the good work you did are just gone. You will never be hired, you will never be hired. It's something you can't fight for." Lu Dingning looked at Du Ben in shock, and was kicked to the side by the British Duke. The British Duke pointed at Lu Dingning and cursed, "You are not making progress, now you are satisfied. Your Majesty, the imperial edict has arrived." The concierge rushed in to report. The British Duke raised his foot and gave Lu Xiren a kick. "You are the same. I have loved you for many years in vain." The British man threw his hands angrily and left. Du Ben looked at the father and son on the ground and said, "The imperial edict has arrived. Second master, please hurry up and change your clothes to receive the edict." After saying that, Du Ben quickly went to catch up with the British Duke to make arrangements for receiving the imperial edict. After the British Duke changed his clothes, he took the whole family to the gate of the British Duke's mansion to receive the order. Eunuch Fang, who was announcing the decree, saw the door open, and the British Duke came out with everyone. He raised his voice and announced, the British Duke Lu Chao, the Minister of War Lu Dingning, and the military envoy Lu Xiran of the Army and Horses Division accepted the decree. The British Duke took the lead and knelt down to receive the order. Eunuch Fang opened the imperial edict and preached loudly, by God's decree, the Emperor's edict said, Lu Dingning, the Minister of the Ministry of War, and Lu Xiran, the military envoy of the Military and Horse Department, as imperial officials, ignored the imperial laws, had no principles, and had an unruly style. The impact of this incident is extremely bad. Remove Lu Dingning, and Lu Xiran will never be hired. As the head of the family, the British Duke Lu Chao was not strict in running the family. He was fined 3 years of salary and removed the hereditary and irreplaceable title of the British Duke. From now on, the title of the British Duke was passed down to 3 generations, Duke, Marquis, and Uncle. Admire this. The scene was completely silent. The servants in the mansion were holding their breath and did not dare to breathe. Lu Xiran's face was ashen, and his body shivered slightly behind Mrs. Yang. It was only then that he realized that he had been in serious trouble. Not only did he lose his job, but the British government also lost his hereditary title. Wait a minute, will my grandfather beat himself to death? The one whose heart sank to the bottom of his heart was Lu Dingning, who was kneeling behind the British prince. He knew very well how important the position of Minister of War was to the prince. At first, his father spent a lot of effort to get this position for him. Father told him at the beginning that as long as he holds this position, it will be a meritorious service to the prince. Now that he has lost this position, is it a big mistake for the prince? Eunuch Fang looked at the stunned British Duke, coughed twice, and reminded him, my lord, please accept the order. The British Duke came to his senses and said, thank you Lord for your kindness. The British Duke stood up and took the imperial decree from Eunuch Fang. Du Bin saw the opportunity and stuffed a money bag into Eunuch Fang's hand. Thank you for your hard work, Eunuch. Please treat me to a cup of tea. Eunuch Fang weighed the money bag and put it into his sleeve pocket. Du Bin took the opportunity to ask, excuse me, father-in-law, are your wife and prince okay? The mouth of people was soft and short-handed, and Fang Gong made up with Du Bin sensible, whispered, the mother is okay, and the prince was reprimanded by the emperor. Du Bin bowed to Eunuch Fang and thanked him, thank you, eunuch. Please go slowly. The British Duke returned to the palace with the imperial edict, went straight to Wen Yuan pavilion, locked himself in the study, and even Du Bin was not allowed to enter. Lu Dingning and Lu Xiran followed to the door of the study room with fear. When they saw the British Duke closing the door of the study room, their hearts dropped slightly in their throats. The British public did not punish them on the spot, so the chance of being punished next was much smaller. Lu Dingning breathed a sigh of relief and was about to go back to sleep. He turned around and saw Lu Xiran, glared at him with a dark face, and walked out past Lu Xiran. LV Dingning met his mother and Mr. Li at the gate of Wen Yuan pavilion. End of this chapter. The Rebirth of Space, the lucky girl from a farm family. Author, he would fire every. Chapter 218. Chapter 218 Idea. When Mrs. Li saw Lu Dingning coming out, she turned her head to the side with a stern face. Lu Dingning wanted to say hello, but when Li turned his face away, he swallowed the words on his lips. Seeing that neither of them paid attention to the other, Mrs. Yang raised her crutch and swung it at Lu Dingning. You're a loser, I'll beat you to death. Lu Dingning looked at the crutch waving towards him and immediately moved out of the way, saying, Mom, calm down, be careful not to reach your waist. As soon as Lu Dingning finished speaking, Mrs. Yang's crutch passed by him. Before the crutch hit Lu Dingning, Mrs. Yang seemed to have twisted her waist. Oh, my old waist. Speaking, Mrs. Yang threw away her crutches, stretched out her hands to support her waist and cried out the pain. Seeing Mrs. Yang frowning in pain, grinning and moaning, Mrs. Li hurriedly stepped forward to ask. She turned around and wanted to ask her servants to come forward to help, but she realized that she had not asked her servants to follow her. Because Mrs. Yang and Mrs. Li were afraid that the British father would punish their son, they rushed over to persuade them, and they were also afraid that people would make fun of their son, so they did not let the maid and mother-in-law follow. Li asked nervously, "How is mother? Where is the injury?" Li lowered her head and looked at Mrs. Yang's waist, trying to squeeze her to relieve the pain. Lu Dingning looked at Mrs. Yang nervously and asked with concern, "Where is mother injured?" "My son asked a doctor to come over and take a look at mother." Mrs. Yang glanced sideways at Mr. Li, and when she saw Mr. Li lowering his head and looking at her waist, she hurriedly winked at her son. Lv Dingning was stunned for a moment, then came to his senses. Mrs. Yang groaned, "Oh, it hurts me to death. You're such a loser, why don't you quickly call someone to take care of me?" "Oh. Oh. Okay, my son is going to call someone now. Auntie, please bear with me." Lu Dingning stood up while comforting Mrs. Yang, looked around, saw Lu Xiren walking over, and shouted, "Hurry up and carry it on your back, your grandmother goes back." Lu Xiren saw Mrs. Yang sitting on the ground and rushed over in panic, "Grandma, what's wrong?" Seeing her son coming, Mrs. Li looked better and explained, "Your grandmother is up to her waist. Can Xiren carry her? Otherwise, let someone carry a soft sedan over." Lu Xiren knelt down and said, "Let me try, mother-in-law, help grandma on my back." "Xiren, are you okay?" Li asked worriedly while supporting Mrs. Yang. No wonder Mrs. Li is worried, Mrs. Yang is as fat as a Buddha, and it is really not something that ordinary people can carry. Sure enough, Lu Xiren hugged Mrs. Yang's fat body and stood up, then stumbled forward, her right leg flashed and she knelt on the ground, and the grandfather and grandson fell into a pile. Surprised, Mrs. Li quickly shouted, "Xiren, are you okay?" Lu Dingning hurriedly stepped forward to help Mrs. Yang, "Mom, how are you? Did you fall?" After Lu Dingning asked Mrs. Yang, he turned to Lu Xiren and yelled, "You are still trying to be brave when you can't carry it? You can't do anything. What's the use of you?" Lu Xiren was angered by Lu Dingning's yelling. He stood up and shouted at Lu Dingning, "You can do it? Come and carry it. You are such a shameless thing. What qualifications do you have to criticize me?" Lu Dingning stared, pointed at Lu Xiren and cursed angrily, "How dare you scold me?" Lu Xiren's anger, which had been suppressed for a long time, surged out like a river that burst its embankment. He blushed and said, "So what if I scold you? You don't need a mirror to look at yourself. From top to bottom, how do you look like me? Shameless and shameless thing. It's all thanks to you that the British government is in this situation today. You are such a shameless thing, you are in vain. You have the nerve to say that I am useless, but you are the most useless thing." Lu Dingning has lived for decades, and this is the first time someone has pointed his nose at him and scolded him, and the person scolding him was his own son. Lu Dingning was so angry that he raised his hand to block Lu Xiren's hand and punched him. "You even dare to scold me? You have nothing for young and old. I'm afraid you will go to heaven. I will beat you to death." Lu Xiren dodged to the left, avoiding Lu Dingning's fist, and casually punched Lu Dingning, and replied, "You are such a disrespectful person, why do you have people respect you? Did you really say that? Why do people respect you? You have to fight for the woman I sleep with. Is there such a shameless old man as you in the world?" Lu Dingning reacted slowly and was unable to dodge. He was hit by Lu Xiren's punch, and his face immediately swelled. Li was relieved to watch on the sidelines and allowed her son to punch and kick Lu Dingning. Mrs. Yang pretended to be injured in order to ease the relationship between her son and his wife. Unexpectedly, She provoked a fight between her grandson and her son. He hurriedly stood up to start a fight. He got up in a hurry and twisted his waist. "Oh, it hurts me to death, you two, stop it." Lu Dingning was punched several times by Lu Xiren. The pain caused him to grab Lu Xiren's arm and bite him. The movement here alarmed the servants of Wen Yuan Pavilion. Du Bin and his people rushed over. Seeing the scene of chickens and dogs dancing, he sighed and hurriedly had people pull Lu Xiren and Lu Dingning away. Let people carry Mrs. Yang back to Rong'an Hall. Li followed to Rong'an Hall to serve Mrs. Yang, while Lu Dingning and Lu Xiren returned to their own courtyards. Hua Ruiming hit a wall in Wutong Lane in Hua Mansion. He returned to Hua Mansion with a depressed look on his face and asked in a deep voice, "Where is the old lady?" The servant leaned over and replied, "Come back to me, sir, the old lady and my wife are in the flower hall listening to the steward's reply." Hua Ruiming raised his feet and hurried to the flower hall. When Lu saw Hua Ruiming coming back, she raised her hand and said, "You guys go down first and come back later if you have anything to do." The housekeeper bent her knees and responded, "Yes." When the servants left, Ms. Lu asked, "What? No one has brought her back?" Hua Ruiming sipped his tea irritably, shook his head and said, "No." Ms. Lu frowned in displeasure, "You're a girl from a mountain village. You go to pick her up yourself and she doesn't come back. It's really shameless." Hua Ruiming also felt that Gu Huayu was being shameless. This girl is so ignorant that she thinks she can gain a foothold in the capital with people from Shi Mansion protecting her. Hua Ruiming's words awakened Madame Lu. Before that, Madame Lu only thought of the dilapidated Wan Mansion, not Shi Mansion at all. "If you don't tell me, I forgot about it when I arrived at Jiangxi Mansion. Ping Jiying is here, so it's no wonder that Xiaonazai didn't come back with you." Lu Ziqiu said disdainfully, "How can a minister's office compare with our commander's office? Xiaonazai has a brain problem, so she will listen to other people's slanders. Since she doesn't want to come back, just follow her wishes and don't have to worry." Lu Shi said disapprovingly, "She is Hua Ling's daughter, and our mansion is Hua Mansion. If we don't do this, what will others think of us? It's not like we don't let her come back. Doesn't that mean we can't bring her back? Do we have to force her to come back?" Lu asked. Mrs. Lu looked at Lu Ziqiu and sneered, "It's so strong that it's not necessary. Let's continue to invite him. Isn't it said that sincerity leads to gold and stone?" Ms. Lu asked back, "What if she still refuses? Continue to invite me with a stern face? We don't owe her anything, so why should we be so humble as to invite her? Whether she loves you back or not, forget it." Hua Ruiming was afraid that Mrs. Lu would be persuaded by Lu Ziqiu, so he hurriedly took over the words, "You can't say that. Anyang is right. She is the uncle's daughter and a member of the Hua family. We brought her back not because of her face, but because of her for the sake of uncle and the ancestors of the Hua family." Lu Ziqiu curled her lips, "The problem is that others don't appreciate it and don't want to come back. Is it possible that we can kidnap her back?" Mrs. Lu sighed and said, "Let it go in advance. I will pick it up myself in a few days." Hua Ruiming felt secretly happy when his mother nodded. He leaned over and said, "I'm here to help you." Mrs. Lu waved her hand, "What's the point? I'm her aunt, and it's my duty to bring her back. I'm tired. Send me back to rest." In the Prime Minister's mansion, Wang Piyun found out that Gu Huayu was granted the title of princess, and was restless sitting or standing in the yard. Grandma Guan comforted her from the side, "Miss, you should be calm when things happen, don't be anxious. Mammy Guan is Wang Piyun's nanny. She is always obedient and doting on Wang Piyun. Wang Piyun is also very dependent on Aunt Guan. If she has any concerns, she may not tell her mother Kui, but she will definitely tell Aunt Guan." Wang Piyun said to Aunt Guan sadly, "Auntie, the emperor has made her the princess, What should I do? Mammy Guan knew that her young lady had been in love with Mr. Lulu for many years, but due to her tutoring, she was not like the girl from the Shi family who made a fuss that was known throughout the city. That day, the lady came to tell the young lady that the Prime Minister had proposed a marriage for the young lady. The young lady was not happy at first. When the madam said that the other party was the sixth master of the British government, the young lady was so shocked that her eyes widened and she could not recover for a long time. After the lady left, the young lady held her in her arms and cried with joy, saying that the Bodhisattva had appeared. At that time, the caretaker found out that the young lady went to Daxiakyo temple to offer incense every month, and her wish was to marry Mr. Lulu. At this point, the caretaker finally understood what her young lady was thinking. Aunt Guan gently advised, "Miss, don't think too much. What if the emperor makes her the princess? You are the one who is engaged to the sixth master. The British government has even paid the betrothal gift. All we have to do is wait for the marriage of the two families to be settled. We're getting married next time." Grandma Guan's words made Wang Piyun feel more at ease, but thinking about the conversation between her aunt and her mother, her uneasiness rose again. "But, Mr. Lu is obsessed with her. I have not been married for a day, and I am always worried and not at ease at all. Auntie, what should I do?" Looking at the extremely troubled Wang Piyun, Aunt Guan's heart began to twitch, and she advised, "Miss, don't think so much. In fact, according to Yilanu, it is better for Miss Gu to be made a princess than not." Wang Piyun looked at Grandma Guan in confusion. Why did Grandma say this? Mammy Guan pulled Wang Piyun to sit down. "Miss, sit here and listen to me slowly talk to you." Wang Piyun let her grandma lead her to sit at the table, and urged, "Mammy, please speak quickly." Grandma Guan poured tea for Wang Piyun and said, "Miss, this is what I think. Since ancient times, marriage matters have always been the orders of the elders and the words of the matchmaker. The marriage between the young lady and the sixth master was decided by the elders of both parties. 3 books and 6 etiquettes were followed, and it was orthodox. What the second lady said to the madam, the old slave felt that she could pretend not to hear it. Wang Piyun curled her lips and said, "But if Master Six really cares about her, what should I do?" Grandma Guan patted Wang Piyun's hand and said, "Miss, listen to what I have to say. According to Mr. Liu's temperament, if Mr. Liu really cared about that young lady, he would definitely argue with reason and come to the house to cancel the marriage, but Mr. Liu did not do so. What does this mean?" Wang Piyun stared at Aunt Guan and asked with earnest eyes, "What does it mean?" Grandma Guan smiled and said, "My lady, it means that Mr. Liu is also optimistic about this marriage." Wang Piyun asked with a happy face, "Really? Is he really optimistic about this marriage?" Seeing that Wang Piyun finally smiled, Grandma Guan breathed a sigh of relief in her heart. If Master Six is not satisfied, Master Six can come and break off the engagement. Master Six is so favored by the emperor, why should he wrong himself? Wang Piyun felt that Grandma Guan's analysis was very reasonable, and nodded in a good mood. "Well, what Mama said makes sense. If he is not satisfied with the marriage, why doesn't he come to the house to cancel the engagement? Why did he wrong himself? Why did Mammy say it would be better for Miss Gu to be given the title of princess? Oh, I figured it out." Grandma Guan patted Wang Piyun's hand lovingly and said, "Young lady is such a smart person, she can understand everything. If Miss Gu were from an ordinary family, Mr. Liu would carry her into the house in a small sedan chair. From now on, even if you become a big girl and she becomes a small girl, how much trouble will it cause to the young lady if Liu Ye's heart is with her? It's good now, the emperor made her the princess. How can any princess in this world be a junior?" Wang Piyun nodded repeatedly, "Yes, Mama is right. The princess is a concubine, and she doesn't want to make people laugh." Grandma Guan then said, "Miss, we have to plan this matter in the long run. Wang Piyun suppressed a smile and asked, "Mommy, what are your plans? You tell me, I'll listen." Auntie Guan said, "The marriage between the young lady and the sixth master was decided personally by the Duke and the Prime Minister. It is a done deal. However, Mr. Lu usually has more contacts with Duke Qingqiu. After Ye Shangshu passed away, Mrs. Ye lived in the Qingqiu mansion for a long time. On the surface, she was taking care of Mrs. Jean. On the inside, she must have been uncomfortable living in the British mansion. It is said that Duke Qingqiu left his own courtyard for Master Lu, and Master Lu often lived in Duke Qingqiu's mansion. It can be seen that Master Lu has deep feelings for Duke Qingqiu. Mrs. Ye is Lu Ye's mother, and Duke Qingqiu is Lu Ye's maternal family. The old slave thought that the young lady should often visit Duke Qingqiu's mansion. First of all, if you get along with Mrs. Ye more, it will be easier for mother-in-law and daughter-in-law to get along with each other in the future. Secondly, Miss can have more contact with Mr. Lu, so that Mr. Lu can see how good Miss is. Wang Piyun's eyes lit up, he raised his hands and put his arms around Mammy Guan's neck, and said coquettishly, "Mammy, you are the best." Mammy Guan felt warm, raised her hand and patted Wang Piyun on the back, and said with a smile, "Young lady treats this old slave well." Wang Piyun let go of Nanny Guan and asked, "But, how should I get to the Duke Qingqiu's mansion?" In recent years, since the death of Ye Shangshu, the people in the Duke Qingqiu's mansion have lived in seclusion and have not attended anyone's banquet for many years. Mammy Guan smiled and scratched Wang Piyun's nose, and said with a smile, "Young Miss is really a fan of the authorities. You can go to Qingqiu Duke's mansion with ease no matter how you go." Wang Piyun was confused, how to get to Dufang. Grandma Guan nodded with a smile and explained, "The British government house is the sixth master's home. If the young lady comes to visit on her own initiative, people will gossip. But Qingqiu Gongfu is different. Qingqiu Gongfu is the sixth master's maternal family, and Qingqiu Gongfu has always told the outside world that Mrs. Jean is not in good health. The young lady went to the Duke Qingqiu's mansion to visit Mrs. Jean, and the people around her would only say that the young lady was sensible and filial." End of this chapter. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Rebirth of Space, the lucky girl from a farm family. Author, he would fire every. Chapter 219. Chapter 219 Coming to the door. Auntie Guan paused for a moment, then continued, "Sixth Master cares about the people in the Qingqiu Palace. Seeing that the young lady is so caring, he will definitely be grateful to the young lady. This is a matter of killing two birds with one stone." Wang Piyun was so excited that she threw herself into Aunt Guan's arms. "Mommy, you are my lucky star, and I am the best." Mammy Guan hugged Wang Piyun, smiled and let her act coquettishly in her arms. Wang Piyun acted coquettishly for a while, then stood up and said, "Mommy, let someone come in and change my clothes. Let's go to the Duke Qingqiu's mansion." Grandma Guan smiled and asked, "Are you going over now?" "I haven't submitted the post yet." Wang Piyun shook his head, "No need to hand in the post, let's go directly to the door. Just go to a nearby garment shop to make clothes, and stop by to visit Mrs. Jean." Mammy Guan smiled and nodded, "This is a good idea. I will let them come in and help the young lady change." At the Duke Qingqiu's mansion, after breakfast, Mrs. Jean asked, "Mother, I have someone prepare the gifts. Shall we leave now?" Hua and Ye were family friends, and Mrs. Ping and Mrs. Ye were close friends. After Gu Huayu's life experience was revealed, it was time for the Ye family to come to congratulate her. After discussing with the family last night, it was decided that Mrs. Jean would take the female family members to Wutong Lane. Mrs. Jean took a sip of tea and said, "Okay, let me pack up and then we'll set off." MRSGN leaned forward and said, "There's no rush. There's plenty of time. Mother will take care of herself." MRSGN put down the teacup in her hand and tried to stand up with her hands on the table. Seeing this, Madame Feng and MRSGN hurried forward to help her. MRSGN smiled and waved her hand. "No, I can do it on my own in the morning. If you drink too much porridge, I'll go to Gong's room first." MRSGN reminded, "Mom, please slow down, we have plenty of time, there is no rush." MRSGN responded, "I understand, you should go and get ready," and Feng helped MRSGN go to the courtroom. Yamingjin said to MRSGN, "Anayang, I'm going to change clothes. Meet us at the second door later." MRSGN waved her hand, "Go and hold on tight, don't let your elders wait for you." "I know," Yamingjin responded as he walked. MRSGN looked at MRSya and asked, "Sister Shan, aren't you going to change?" MRSya shook her head and asked uneasily, "Sister-in-law, can I go there like this? Will it cause trouble to Zikin?" A few days ago, MRSya heard from Zisu that the British government sent people to keep an eye on Wutong Lane. If the Duke knew that she had gone to Wutong Lane, would it embarrass Zikin? MRSGN understood MRS's concerns and comforted her, "I don't think there's anything wrong with it. You and Yingzi get along well. When Hanru was alive, you often played together. I heard from the master that when Mr. Hua was in Beijing, he often came to our house to drink tea and talk with his father. To sum up, Hua and Ye are family friends. Now that the daughter of the Hua family is back and has been made a princess by the emperor, it is only natural for us to go out and celebrate. Since it is human nature, one should be generous. What do you think?" MRSya smiled and said, "That's right, I'm overthinking. I'm a person who pretends to be insecure and has something on my mind. I'm always hesitant and timid." MRSGN smiled and said, "If you are concerned, you will be confused." MRSya smiled, stood up and said, "Then I'll go change too." MRSGN smiled and joked, "Go, go. When you see your daughter-in-law, you have to dress up beautifully." "That's right, you can't embarrass your son, you must dress up beautifully," MRSya replied with a smile. MRSGN finished packing and came out. Seeing MRSGN alone outside, she asked, "Where are Sister Shan and Girl Jin?" MRSGN came over to help MRSGN and said, "We have all gone to change clothes. We agreed to meet at the second gate. Let's go there." The mother-in-law and daughter-in-law went to the second door talking and laughing. Yamingjin was already waiting. When he saw them coming, he raised his voice and said, "Mom, let me hurry up." MRSGN smiled and praised, "Well, not bad. The clothes you wear today are also good. The light blue matches your skin color very well." Yamingjin smiled and replied, "Of course, Xiao said that I have a summer skin color, which is suitable for soft and elegant colors." "Oh, the princess still knows this," MRSGN said in surprise. Yamingjin nodded proudly, "Of course, Xiao knows a lot. On the opening day, she even tested some of us with colored cloth." Before Yamingjin finished speaking, a servant came over and said, "Old madam, the third lady from the Prime Minister Wang's mansion has arrived at the door. She said she was going to a nearby garment shop to make clothes. She stopped by to pay a visit to the old madam." MRSGN and MRSGN looked at each other. When Yamingjin heard that Wang Peiyun was coming, his face instantly darkened and he asked, "What is she here for?" "Grandma, Anayang, what should I do next? Are you still going to Wutong Lane?" MRSGN sighed and said, "These people are blocking the door, how can we get out? Go to Shanglai Yuan and tell your aunt so that she knows what's going on. By the way, go to Zizuyuan and tell Zikin." Yamingjin nodded and said, "I understand. Mom, I don't like talking to talented women. I went to look for Yame." Yamei must have gone to Wutong Lane today. Where can you go to find her? MRSGN reminded her loudly. Yamingjin said, oh, I forgot about this. Then I will go to my uncle's house to play with my cousin. You kid. MRSGN said, let her go. MRSGN sighed and said, oh, I can only let her go. I don't know what's wrong with this child. I haven't liked playing with the girls from the Wang family, Kui family, and Lu family since I was a child. I hide from them when I see them. MRSGN said, everyone has their own destiny. Jinyatu and the 3 girls of the Shi family get along well. I'm afraid they won't be able to go out today, so let them go back. MRSGN nodded, turned around and asked the coachman to drive the car back, asked Aunt Feng to help MRSGN back, and went to meet Miss Wang San. When MRSya learned that Miss Wang San had come to her door, she didn't know what to say. Yamingjin said, Auntie, I told you to make sure you know what's going on. I brought the message to you. I have to go and report the news to Brother Zikin, so I'll leave first. MRSya waved her hand and said, go ahead. I know what's going on. After Yamingjin left, MRSya walked around in the room and said to Grandma Yao and Zi Su, she really came to visit Grandma? Only a ghost can believe it, but I don't believe it anyway. Grandma Yao said, if you don't come early, you won't come later. After Miss Gu was named the princess, Miss Wang San came over in a hurry. Does Miss Wang San know anything? MRSya also thought of it and said, she must know something. Jinyatu said that on the day Miss Gu's shop opened, Miss Wang San came to find trouble. Aunt Yao said, so, Miss Wang San should have come well prepared today. Madam, what should we do next? Go and meet Miss Wang San. MRSya said with a headache, no, I'll go see her. What should I say when I meet? I'll give her a warm reception. I'm afraid she will misunderstand her, and I'm afraid Zikin will misunderstand her. If you don't give a warm reception, it's not the way to be a guest. Now I am in a dilemma. Mother Yao asked, what should we do? Let's get out. MRSya looked at Aunt Yao and asked, where to avoid? Zisu said, Madam, I haven't made clothes for a long time. Let's make some clothes. MRSya thought for a while and said helplessly, okay, let's make clothes. Let someone tell my sister-in-law quietly that we will eat lunch outside. Zisu turned around and gave instructions. MRSya packed up and took Zisu with her. Aunt Yao walked to the side door, where she met Luzikin and Ryuan who were about to go out. When Luzikin saw MRSya coming, he bowed and said, where are you going, mother? MRSya said angrily, thanks to you, I have a family and can't stay home, so I can make some clothes. Luzikin asked with a smile, which shop does mother go to make clothes? How about my son accompany you? MRSya was in a good mood and said with a smile, this is the first time in your life that you have offered to go shopping with me. Luzikin leaned forward and said, how about my son spending more time with his mother from now on? Then what are you waiting for, let's go. So, Luzikin accompanied MRSya to a tailor shop, then to a silver shop, and then accompanied MRSya to Chang'an restaurant for lunch. Ryuan sent someone back to Chinkyu's palace to see if Miss Wang San had left. The servants went back and forth several times. It was not until the end of the year that they received a letter from Miss Wang San that she had left, and Luzikin sent MRSya back to Chinkyu. Government. MRSya returned to the house, what did you talk about? Why did Miss Wang San take so long to leave? MRSGN spent a day with the guests, and she was so tired that she shook her head. We started gossiping about common things, and then Miss Wang San talked about playing leaf cards. Our mother said we didn't know how to fight, so Miss Wang San enthusiastically taught us step by step, and we continued playing until the end of the day. Miss Wang San said she would come back to play with her mother another day. MRS's eyes widened and she asked in surprise, Are you coming again? MRSGN nodded and said truthfully, I think she will come to our house often in the future. You'd better know what she is doing. MRSY turned to look at Luzikin and said bitterly, Zikin, what should I do? I don't want to go shopping every day. I'm too tired from shopping. Zikin looked up at the sky speechlessly. MRSGN said, let's talk about it when we get here. It's useless to think too much. Go and see if the food in the kitchen is ready. The office worker will be back soon. MRSGN turned and went to the kitchen. Soon, Ye Cheng and Ye Minghao went to Qingfang Hall to pay their respects to MRSGN. Luzikin had dinner with his family, returned to Zizuyuan, changed his clothes, and took Ryuan to Minjiao Pavilion. Gu Huayu was busy until the end of the day, sending away the guests who came to congratulate her one by one. She was preparing to have dinner with her family when she received a report from Qingyu, Princess, the child is awake. Gu Huayu told her family and followed Qingyu to Minjiao Pavilion. On the way, Qingyu reported, Princess, at the end of the day today, the third lady from Wang Xiang's mansion went to Qingqiu mansion, and she has not left yet. He who arrived at the end of the morning has not left at this moment? Gu Huayu felt a little sour in her heart, and said lightly, I know, take the person back, there is no need to keep an eye on him. After Wang Piyun went to Huayu Pavilion, Gu Huayu made people stare at her. Qingyu responded, okay, I will turn around and pull the people back. When Gu Huayu arrived at Minjiao Pavilion, Lu Guang greeted her, the princess is here, Bao'er has been crying. Gu Huayu raised her head and looked upstairs and said, I didn't hear any sound. Lu Guang explained, he didn't cry, he just kept crying. He looked very pitiful. He didn't let anyone get close to him. If anyone came closer to the bed, he would shrink back, Lu Guang said as he moved forward. Gestures on the face. I know. After saying that, Gu Huayu turned and went upstairs. When Ruhi saw her coming in, he bowed and said, Princess. Gu Huayu nodded slightly, looked at the bed, and asked, how long have you been awake? How are you? Ruhi glanced at the hourglass and replied, I've been awake for half an hour. I'm not in a good mood. I keep crying. I won't eat and won't let anyone get close to me. Gu Huayu said, I understand, if Ji stays, the rest will go out first. Lu Guangqingzu and others retreated. Gu Huayu asked softly as she walked to the bed, why is Bao'er crying? Is it because he has a headache? Bao'er looked at Gu Huayu and instinctively shrank back without replying. His tears were like broken beads, rolling out big and small. Gu Huayu smiled at Bao'er and said, Bao'er, don't be afraid, I just want to help you wipe your tears. If you don't like it, then we won't wipe it. Okay. Gu Hua coaxed her with gentle words for a long time. Bao'er looked at Gu Huayu, maybe thinking that she meant no harm, so he relaxed and lay on the bed, staring at Gu Huayu for a moment. Gu Huayu was speechless and said, what does Bao'er usually like to play? Do you like hide and seek? I especially liked hide and seek when I was a child. I also like to play throwing sandbags and skipping rope. Does Bao'er like skipping rope? By the way, at Bao'er's age, he probably doesn't know how to jump rope yet. When Bao'er gets older, can I teach you how to jump rope? Gu Huayu spoke very slowly, her voice was very gentle, she looked at Bao'er with a smile in her eyes, and observed the changes in his expression. Slowly, Gu Huayu saw that Bao'er's clenched hands relaxed, and his eyes were not as frightened as before. Gu Huayu continued, when I was a child, I loved listening to stories. I always pestered my elders to tell me stories. As long as I listened to the stories, the pain in my body became much lighter. How about I tell Bao'er stories today too, okay? Good. Gu Huayu found that Bao'er actually nodded in agreement. So, Gu Huayu told Bao'er a story. As she was talking, Gu Huayu held Bao'er's hand seemingly casually. Bao Er did not avoid it and let Gu Huayu hold his hand. She looked at Gu Huayu expectantly, hoping that Gu Huayu would continue talking. After the two stories, when Gu Huayu smiles at Bao Er, he will smile back to her. Gu Huayu asked, "Does Bao Er have a headache?" Bao Er shook his head. His head pulled the wound, which made him feel pain, so he nodded again. Gu Huayu asked Bao Er while feeling his pulse, "It won't hurt if you don't move your head, right?" Bao Er nodded. Gu Huayu gently touched Bao Er's face, "Then let's not move. We'll wait a few days until the injury on Bao Er's head is healed before moving again, okay?" Bao Er replied softly, "Okay." Gu Huayu pinched Bao Er's nose, "Bao Er is hungry, let's have some porridge, okay?" Bao Er responded obediently, "Okay." Gu Huayu turned to look at Ruhi. Ruhi brought the porridge over. Gu Huayu took it and fed Bao Er spoonful by spoonful. After Bao Er drank most of the bowl of porridge, she handed the empty bowl to Ruhi. Gu Huayu wiped Bao Er's mouth with a handkerchief and asked him to drink some water. "Bao Er is tired. Close your eyes and go to sleep." Bao Er closed his eyes obediently. Gu Huayu waited for him to sleep soundly before getting up and retreating outside the house. End of this chapter. The Rebirth of Space, the lucky girl from a farm family. Author, he would fire every. Chapter 220. Chapter 220, Withdrawal from Engagement. Luzikin arrived when Gu Huayu was telling Bao Er a story, and stood at the door, watching Gu Huayu tell Bao Er stories, feed Bao Er porridge, and then coax Bao Er to sleep. Gu Huayu felt happy when she saw Luzikin standing at the door. Then she thought about how he had just met Miss Wang San, and immediately felt extremely sad. She nodded to him expressionlessly and said lightly, "Here." After saying that, without waiting for Luzikin to reply, he crossed over to Luzikin and walked into the hall. Luzikin instantly noticed that Gu Huayu's mood was not right, and turned around to follow him to talk. Gu Huayu turned to look at Ruhi and ignored him. "I checked Bao Er's pulse just now. His body is no longer seriously injured, just some external injuries. He will recover after a few days." But looking at his fearful look, he probably remembered something he shouldn't remember. "Next, we have to give him some psychological counseling to help him get out of his fear." Ruhi leaned over and asked, "Psychological counseling? How to do it?" Gu Huayu realized that she had used modern words again, so she explained, "Be patient when dealing with him, observe his reactions more, talk to him in a way that he accepts, and then gradually guide him so that he can regain his mental balance as soon as possible, improve the ability to adapt to the environment." Ruhi nodded as if he didn't understand. "Oh, I understand, I'm busy now." After finishing speaking, Ruhi Qian retreated. Gu Huayu pointed to the seat opposite. "Sixth Master, please sit down. I have something to tell you." If he still felt it before, at this moment Luzikin was convinced that Gu Huayu was so polite to him that he was alienated. A strange feeling came over him, and this feeling made him very uncomfortable. Luzikin looked at Gu Huayu intently. "He was fine when we left last night. What happened today? Made her angry?" The only thing Luzikin could think about was Miss Wang San going to Chinquo Duke's mansion. He looked at Gu Huayu with a guilty conscience and sat down opposite Gu Huayu obediently. Gu Huayu didn't wait for Luzikin to finish speaking, and interrupted him, "Sixth Master, let's not meet again in the future." "Why?" Luzikin felt that the situation was serious and asked in a panic, "Okay, why don't we meet again?" After the words came out of her mouth, Gu Huayu was also stunned. "Why?" She is also asking herself why. It was as if his mouth was not under the control of his brain, and when he spoke he would say negative things. After the words were spoken, the sourness in his heart became even heavier. Miss Wang San can go to the Chinquo Palace to see him openly, but to see him herself, she has to disguise herself and be secretive. Just like when he comes to see me now, he also needs to be secretive. Gu Huayu was so aggrieved that she wanted to cry. Before, she wanted to have a good discussion with him. Before his engagement was terminated, it would not be appropriate for them to meet. Because she didn't want rumors to involve her grandmother and aunt, which was why she promised Huadan not to see him again. But now, she doesn't want to see him again because she doesn't want this stolen happiness. Whether he is willing or not, it is a fact that he has entered into an engagement with Miss Wang San. In this era when marriage is decided by the elders, he and Miss Wang San are the couple recognized by everyone. She has her pride and dignity, and she does not want to be a disgraceful third party. After thinking about it, Gu Huayu said, "There is no reason, I just don't want to see each other again." After saying that, Gu Huayu stood up and prepared to walk out. Lu Ziqin kept staring at Gu Huayu. Before she got up, Lu Ziqin got up first and blocked Gu Huayu's way with a quick step. In desperation, Lu Ziqin reached out and grabbed her arm and argued, "Xiao Yu, I don't allow it." Lu Ziqin's slightly domineering words almost made Gu Huayu relent, but the voice in her heart told her not to relent, otherwise, she would be the disgraceful person. Gu Huayu raised her hand to block Lu Ziqin's hand and blurted out, "I don't want to see you secretly, and I don't want you to see me secretly. In this way, I will feel like a thief, a shameless and dishonorable thief. I hate this feeling, I hate it. Don't come to see me in the future. If you see me, please go away." As Gu Huayu spoke, tears rolled down her face. The sad look on Gu Huayu's face made Lu Ziqin's heart ache. He wanted to hold her in his arms, wipe her tears, and tell her that she was not a thief, but that she was the one he cared about. Before Lu Ziqin could make any move, Gu Huayu raised her hand to fend him off and walked past him. Lu Ziqin was left standing alone in the room. Gu Huayu wiped her tears and walked out, when she met Huada, who came upstairs to look for her. Huada glanced at the room and asked in surprise, "Miss, what is this?" Gu Huayu sniffed and said, "Nothing, take me back to Wutong Lane." Huada nodded and said, "Okay." When the two of them went downstairs, they met Ryuan and Ruhi, who were going upstairs. Seeing tears in Gu Huayu's eyes, Ryuan felt tight and leaned forward and asked, "Princess?" Gu Huayu did not return to Ryuan, but went straight downstairs to the backyard. Ryuan and Ruhi stood on the stairs, watching Gu Huayu leave in the car. They looked at each other and hurried upstairs. Seeing Lu Ziqin standing beside the soft couch blankly, he didn't know what he was thinking. Ryuan shouted nervously, "Master!" Lu Ziqin came back to his senses and said, "You are here, let's go back." After Lu Ziqin finished speaking, he walked out. After walking a few steps, he turned back and said to Ruhi, "You stay here and help take care of Bauer." Gone. Die. Lu Ziqin sat in the car with his eyes closed, his mind filled with Gu Huayu's accusations and grievances and tears, and he felt extremely uncomfortable. After returning to Qingqiu Palace, Lu Ziqin went straight to Shangling Garden. Mrsye took Grandma Yao and Zisu to enjoy the shade in the pavilion. She saw Lu Ziqin coming from a distance, sat up straight and said, "Ziqin is here, pick up the melon slices he likes and bring them over." Zisu bent her knees and turned around to get busy. Lu Ziqin came to the pavilion, bowed to Mrsye. Mrsye pointed to the stone bench opposite, "Sit down." "Are you coming back from outside?" Ziqin sat opposite Mrsye and responded truthfully, "Yes." Mrsye continued to ask in a gossipy manner, "Where did you go so late at night?" Ziqin did not hide anything, "I went to see Xiao." After speaking, Lu Ziqin sighed heavily. Seeing her son sighing, Mrsye put away her gossip and asked tentatively, "What's wrong?" Yan Ran knew that Miss Wang San was angry after she came to the door. Lu Ziqin didn't expect his mother to guess right, so he looked at Mrsye in surprise. Mrsye saw Lu Ziqin's expression and knew that she was right. Then he sighed and said, "I blame your grandfather for this matter, which has caused you a lot of trouble. What are your plans? Based on MRS's understanding of her son, when her son comes to look for her, he is not just coming to complain, he must also be doing something. Zisu brought tea. MRSya took the tea and handed it to Luzikin. She said to Zisu and Aunt Yao, "Stay back." Mama Yao took Zisu out of the pavilion. Luzikin picked up the tea and took a sip, thinking about how to speak to MRSya. MRSya did not rush him, but drank tea and waited for Luzikin to speak. Luzikin thought for a while and said, "Mother, can you accompany me to the Prime Minister's mansion to cancel the engagement tomorrow?" MRSya stood up in shock. Go to the Prime Minister's palace to cancel the engagement. Luzikin looked up at MRSya, nodded and said, "Yes, cancel the engagement." MRSya knew from her son's firm eyes that he had made up his mind, and reminded, "Zikin, have you thought about it? If we cancel the engagement now, we will offend not only your grandfather, but also people from Wang Xiang's faction. In the future, you will not encounter any difficulties in your official career." Zikin nodded, "I understand, I know what's going on." MRSya thought for a while, but did not dare to agree immediately. She said, "This is no small matter. Come with me. Let's go to Qingfang Hall to ask your grandmother." "Okay." Luzikin stood up and followed MRSya out. MRSya came out of the pavilion and said to Aunt Yao, "Go to Wanhe Garden in person to report it, and invite your uncle and his wife to Qingfang Hall. Zikin has something to discuss with everyone." Mama Yao bowed her knees and turned around to go to Wanhe Garden. In Qingfang Hall, Madame Qin had just laid down when Madame Feng came in softly and said, "Madam, my aunt and the sixth master are here and they say they have something to ask you." Mrs. Qin stood up and said while putting on her clothes, "It must be no small matter to come here at this time." Mrs. Qin came out of the back room and saw her son and daughter-in-law coming over. She sat down and asked, "What's the matter? It's so urgent." MRSya said before Luzikin could do it, "Auntie, Zikin asked me to accompany him to the Prime Minister's mansion tomorrow to cancel the engagement." Mrs. Qin was stunned and her eyes fell on Luzikin. "Tomorrow? Is it too urgent?" Yecheng looked at Luzikin and said worriedly, "Zikin, don't be impulsive. If you break off the engagement now, you will offend not only the British prince, but also the Prime Minister's palace. Your future." Yecheng did not say the next words. Zikin nodded, "Thank you, uncle. I have thought about these things and I don't want to delay them any longer." Mrs. Jian said, "Today Mrs. Wang Sunyang came over and waited for Zikin until the end of the day. I and a Niang and I came over. It can be seen that Wang Sunyang was full of eyes. Since Zikin does not have her in his heart and will not marry her in the future, it would be better to break off the engagement as soon as possible, at least it will not delay others. However, you can't just come to the house to cancel the engagement, as this will hurt the face of the Wang Xiangfu. Sister Shan will invite Mrs. Kui out tomorrow and tell Mrs. Kui her intention." Qin Ming'er went to find the king and told the king what he wanted. "Let the king know that the British prince cannot be your master. Let the Prime Minister's palace go to the British Duke's palace to cancel the engagement." Mrs. Qin nodded, "That's the reason. Let's leave our face to the Prime Minister Wang's mansion. It's just that if this happens, Wang Xiang may have a grudge against Shang Zikin, and Zikin's official career will be much more bumpy in the future." Luzikin bowed and thanked, "Zikin understands, thank you grandma, thank you uncle, aunt, thank you mother." After breakfast on the second day, MRSya asked someone to send Kui a message and asked Kui to have tea at Qingke residence. And Luzikin went to Zhongsha province to look for the king. After hearing Chang Sui's report, Prime Minister Wang was very surprised. He frowned and said in a loud voice, "Please come in." Chang Sui left and said to Luzikin, "Sixth Master, the Prime Minister has invited me." Luzikin followed the chief into the reception room. After a while, Wang Xiang came in from the east gate. After the two parties greeted each other, the guests and hosts took their seats. After the chief minister served tea and left, Wang Xiang asked, Ziyi Qin came here today. Is there something wrong? Lu Ziqin bowed and replied respectfully, I have something to trouble the prime minister. The king asked, what's the matter? Lu Ziqin replied directly, I'm here to break off the engagement with the prime minister. Ziqin is not talented and is not worthy of the third lady. The hand that the prime minister stretched out to serve the tea paused, and his sharp eyes glanced at Lu Ziqin. Lu Ziqin met the prime minister's gaze without fear, and then added, I hope the prime minister will be successful. After speaking, Lu Ziqin bowed to the king. The prime minister stared at Lu Ziqin closely, and after a moment, asked, Ziqin, do you know what you are talking about? Does the British Lord know what you said today? Lu Ziqin nodded, returning to Prime Minister, I have thought carefully about every word I said today, so I naturally know what I am talking about. As for the British Duke, he did not know that he would come to look for the Prime Minister today. Hence, the British Duke is not aware of what I am saying today. The British father-in-law did not inform me when he made this marriage. If I cancel the engagement, I don't need to inform the British father-in-law. The reason why I came to inform the Prime Minister today is because I don't want to involve the innocent third lady. If the Prime Minister is thinking about the third wife, he can choose a day to go to the British government to cancel the engagement. This is what I can do for the third lady. I have finished what I want to say, so I will take my leave. After saying that, Lu Ziqin cupped his hands and said goodbye. The Prime Minister raised his hand to stop him and said, wait a minute. Lu Ziqin stopped to look at the Prime Minister and asked, do you have any other instructions? The Prime Minister stood up, looked at Lu Ziqin and asked, do you know why the British Duke married the Prime Minister? Lu Ziqin shook his head and said, I don't know, and I don't want to know. The king waved his hand and said, go ahead. Lu Ziqin took 2 steps back, turned around and left the room. Through the window, Wang Xiang watched Lu Ziqin leave the courtyard of Zhongsha province. The chief went into the room to put away the teacups. He saw Wang Xiang standing in the room with a sullen face. He bowed his hands and said, Master Xiang. The Prime Minister withdrew his gaze and ordered, take my name card and go to the British Duke's mansion, and ask the British Duke to meet me at the Jingbo Tea House at the corner of the door. The chief took the title card of the Prime Minister, exited the room, and turned around to go to the British Duke's mansion. The British government received the message and set off immediately. Half an hour before and after Lu Ziqin left Zhongsha province, the British Duke had already arrived at the door of Jingbo Tea House. Lu Ziqin's car was parked not far away. Yuan watched the British Duke enter the tea house and said to Lu Ziqin, Sir, the Duke of Guo has entered. After finishing his report, he turned around and saw Wang Xiang, dressed in regular clothes, walking towards the tea house. Sir, the Prime Minister is here and has also entered the tea house. Lu Ziqin said calmly, I know, let's go back. Yuan drove back to the Qingqiu Duke's mansion, and reported the news from the British Duke's mansion to Lu Ziqin as he walked. Master, yesterday, after the imperial edict arrived at the Duke's residence, the Duke locked himself in the study and did not come out of the study until this morning. By the way, the second master and the uncle had a fight yesterday, and the old lady stepped back and said, Tisk, 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 the Duke's mansion is really a mess now. Lu Ziqin didn't care what happened to the British Duke's palace. He only said, let people keep an eye on the Prime Minister's palace and the British Duke's palace. Once the Prime Minister's palace goes to the British Duke's palace to cancel their engagement, they will immediately spread the news. End of this chapter.